Joshua Powell was born on January 20, 1976, in Puyallup, Washington, to Stephen and Terica Powell. He had 4 siblings: Michael, John, Jennifer, and Alina. However, life in the Powell family was far from normal. Their father, Stephen, was controlling and inappropriate, fostering a toxic atmosphere for his children. He shared adult material with his sons and set no boundaries, exposing them to adult content that influenced their behavior. As a teenager, Joshua acted out violently. He once killed his sister's pet gerbil in a fit of anger. He also threatened his mother with a knife during an argument, and when he felt desperate, he threatened to harm himself. In 2000, Joshua met Susan Cox at a church dinner. She was kind, hardworking, and full of life, and they got married within a year. Unbeknownst to Susan, her marriage would encounter serious challenges. Initially, they lived with Joshua's father, Stephen, in Washington, and that was when things became really disturbing. Stephen began to obsess over Susan. He watched her with a camera, used a small mirror to look into the bathroom, stole her underwear from the washing machine, read her diary, and posted love songs online under a pseudonym. Finally, one day, he confessed his feelings to Susan. This conversation, which included Susan's panicked rejection, was accidentally recorded on his own camera. It became the final straw. Joshua and Susan decided to pack up and move to Utah, hoping to forget about Stephen. For a while, life seemed to stabilize for Joshua and Susan, who had 2 sons named Charlie and Braden. They relocated to West Valley City, Utah, in search of a fresh start. However, Susan felt increasingly suffocated in her marriage. Her friends noticed her unhappiness and learned that Joshua hardly showed her any affection, creating a sense of distance between them. By the summer of 2008, their situation had deteriorated significantly. Joshua and Susan argued constantly, even in front of their children. Joshua had become extremely controlling, making all the decisions and leaving Susan feeling trapped. Their marriage was not just struggling, it was falling apart. He took complete control of their finances, forcing Susan to rely on him for even minor expenses. He reduced their grocery budget, refused to buy her new clothes, and required her to justify every dollar she spent. While he guarded their bank accounts, he had no issue spending money on himself, wasting thousands while Susan struggled to afford basic necessities. The issue extended to their vehicles as well. Although they owned 2 cars, Joshua claimed the family car as his own. Instead of allowing Susan to drive to work, he made her ride a bike, regardless of the weather or her fatigue. Moreover, he started to distance himself from their shared faith. Although they had been active members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Joshua began refusing to attend services with Susan and their sons. He mocked her beliefs, made excuses to avoid church, and discouraged her involvement. The most painful betrayal came when Joshua refused to sever ties with his father, Stephen, despite Susan's insistence that he was dangerous and unwelcome in their lives. Joshua ignored her concerns, continued to communicate with his father, and allowed their young children to maintain contact with him. By 2007, Joshua had accumulated over $200,000 in debt, adding to their marital strain as Susan recognized that their situation was worsening. In response, she began documenting everything. In 2008, Susan created a video documenting the damage in her home, which she attributed to Joshua. That same year, she wrote a secret will ominously stating that if she were to die, it might not be an accident, even if it appeared to be one. Just a year later, she disappeared without a trace. On December 6, 2009, everything seemed normal. That morning, Susan, Charlie, and Braden went to church as usual. Susan interacted with friends and tended to her boys, and nothing appeared out of the ordinary. After church, a neighbor visited the family and spent some time with them before leaving. No one could have predicted that this would be the last time anyone would see Susan. The following morning, December 7th, something felt off. Susan didn't show up for work and hadn't called in sick or requested a day off. At the same time, the boys' nanny noticed that Joshua hadn't dropped them off, which was unusual for him. Concerned, she tried to contact the family, but no one answered. As hours went by without any word from Susan or Joshua, worry turned to fear. Joshua's mother, Terica, and his sister, Jennifer, learned about the situation and rushed to the house. When they arrived, they found the doors locked, the curtains drawn, and no one inside. The unsettling silence heightened their anxiety. They knocked and called out, but received no response. In a state of panic, they called the police. Officers arrived and forced entry into the home, fearing that the family might have been victims of carbon monoxide poisoning or faced another emergency. What the officers discovered inside the house was deeply concerning. Although the house was empty, something felt wrong. Susan's purse, wallet, and identification were still there, untouched. Her cell phone was later found in the family's only car, a Chrysler Town & Country minivan that Joshua had been using. It was turned off. There were no signs of a struggle, but one detail stood out. 2 box fans were set up in the living room, blowing air directly onto a damp spot on the couch. This unusual detail felt unsettling. Hours later, around 5 p.m., Joshua returned home with his sons, Charlie and Braden. The police quickly brought him in for questioning. His explanation was strange. He claimed that after midnight on December 7th, he took his 2 young sons, ages 4 and 2, on a spontaneous camping trip to the Pony Express Trail in western Utah, a remote area characterized by snow and freezing temperatures. He mentioned that Susan stayed home to sleep. His story raised many questions. Who would take toddlers on an impromptu camping trip in sub-freezing weather in the middle of the night, especially when they had work and daycare to prepare for in just a few hours? Police found it suspicious that Joshua had not notified his boss about not coming to work that day. When asked why, he gave a puzzling answer. He claimed he had lost track of the days and thought it was Sunday instead of Monday. Investigators aimed to confirm his story by sending a team to the area where he claimed to have camped. However, they found no evidence to support his claim: no tire tracks in the snow, no footprints, no fire pit, nothing. It was as if he had never gone on that trip. Things took an even stranger turn. On December 8th, after a second police interview, Joshua suddenly rented a car from Salt Lake City International Airport and then disappeared for nearly 18 hours. His whereabouts during that time remain unknown. When he finally reappeared, he called his mother from Interstate 84 in Tremonton, Utah, sounding disoriented and giving vague answers about his location. Later, he told his sister Jennifer that he had been driving around the city aimlessly, randomly getting on and off different freeways. When police examined the rental car, they found that he had added 87 miles to the odometer. Where did he go? What was he doing? No one knows, but it was becoming increasingly evident that Joshua was concealing something. 2 days after Susan went missing, the police conducted another search of her home. This time, they found something concerning on the floor: traces of Susan's blood. While it wasn't a large amount, it was enough to raise serious questions. Inside the house, they also discovered life insurance policies totaling $1.5 million and a handwritten letter from Susan. In the letter, she expressed her growing fear for her life and mentioned being terrified of Joshua. Years later, DNA tests confirmed that one blood sample belonged to Susan, while another matched an unknown male, whose identity remains unknown. As the police investigated Joshua's actions following Susan's disappearance, his behavior appeared increasingly suspicious. He emptied her retirement accounts, canceled her chiropractic appointments, and withdrew his sons from daycare, all within days of her vanishing. It seemed he was trying to erase her from their lives. Additionally, Joshua had previously talked to co-workers about how to dispose of a body in an abandoned mine shaft. At the time, people dismissed it as a strange comment, but now, it seemed more significant. As investigators worked to understand what happened to Susan, they questioned the only other witnesses present with Joshua that night: his sons. 4-year-old Charlie was interviewed, and surprisingly, he confirmed that the camping trip took place. However, his account included a significant twist. He claimed that their mother was with them. According to Charlie, Susan was in the car that night but never returned home. Weeks later, a teacher overheard Charlie make a chilling remark, stating that his mother was dead, without any details or explanations, suggesting he had come to accept this reality. Additionally, Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, reported a troubling incident. At daycare, Charlie's younger brother, Braden, drew a picture of a van. When asked about it, Braden pointed to the back of the van and said, "Mommy was in the trunk." This raised further suspicions for the police, who were becoming increasingly convinced that Joshua was aware of what had happened to Susan. They intended to bring Joshua in for further questioning and requested all footage of his interviews with local news outlets. However, Joshua showed no willingness to cooperate. On December 14th, he obtained legal representation. In the following days, he became more distant and less responsive to the authorities. Just before Christmas, he gathered his sons and left Utah, returning to Puyallup, Washington, to live with his father, Stephen Powell. By December 24th, police identified him as a person of interest in the case. Sadly, the situation was far from resolved. In 2010, Joshua moved into his father's house in Puyallup, bringing his two young sons, Charlie and Braden. Joshua made it clear he wasn't returning to Utah, announcing plans to rent out their home in West Valley City. Some reports indicated he left due to losing his job, but those who knew him felt he was fleeing from something. Shortly after settling in Washington, a website called SusanPowell.org emerged. It claimed to be the official site for Susan Powell, but instead of helping to find her, it focused on defending Joshua. The site accused Susan's family, including her sister Jennifer Graves, and even the LDS Church of conducting a smear campaign against him. Some posts went so far as to suggest that Susan had fled to Brazil with another missing person, journalist Stephen Kocher, a completely unfounded theory. It didn't take long for people to suspect that Joshua and his father, Stephen, were behind the website. Then, by late 2010, the Powells made a startling claim. They suggested that Susan had been mentally ill and had intentionally abandoned her family. This seemed like a desperate attempt to change the narrative, but Susan's parents quickly rebutted it. There was no evidence to support the idea that Susan left on her own or that she was mentally unstable. While Joshua tried to portray himself as the victim, the police began focusing on his father, Stephen. A family friend revealed that Stephen had been obsessed with Susan for years. When investigators examined Stephen's computers, they discovered 4,500 images of Susan, many taken without her consent. These were not just ordinary photographs, they included disturbing close-ups of her body. Police began investigating Joshua's brother, Michael Powell, after he displayed suspicious behavior. Shortly after Susan went missing, he sold his broken Ford Taurus to a junkyard in Pendleton, Oregon. This raised eyebrows, especially when he later requested satellite images of the lot, seemingly to monitor the car. When authorities tracked it down, they used cadaver dogs, which indicated that human remains had once been in the trunk. Unfortunately, DNA tests did not yield conclusive results, leaving a key question in the case unanswered. In September 2011, police thought they had a significant lead. While searching Topaz Mountain in Utah, a location frequently visited by Joshua, they discovered what looked like a grave site. The ground appeared to have been recently disturbed and showed signs of digging. Investigators spent several days examining the area, but ultimately found no remains. Meanwhile, tensions between the Joshua families and the Susan families escalated. After police searched Stephen's home, both he and Joshua took to the media to advocate for their side of the story. Stephen claimed that he and Susan were developing a romantic relationship before her disappearance, using old journal entries from her teenage years to argue that she had always been unstable. A judge did not accept this narrative. He ruled that Stephen and Joshua could not publish any of Susan's personal writings and ordered them to return or destroy any journals they had already made public. Then the situation escalated. On September 22nd, the police arrested Stephen on charges of voyeurism and child abuse. Investigators found secretly recorded videos in his home featuring young girls, adult women, and, most alarmingly, Susan. It was apparent that Stephen posed a serious danger, and authorities began to suspect that Joshua might not be innocent either. John Long, Washington's Assistant Attorney General, announced that Joshua was now part of the investigation. The day after Stephen's arrest, Susan's father, Chuck Cox, filed for custody of his grandchildren, Charlie and Braden. Initially, the court granted him only temporary custody, allowing Joshua the opportunity to regain custody if he moved out of Stephen's home. Joshua rented a house in South Hill, Washington, presenting it as if he were complying with the order. However, authorities later claimed he never actually lived there. By this time, Joshua's sister, Jennifer, publicly expressed her belief that he was involved in Susan's disappearance. As the custody battle escalated, the court ordered Joshua to undergo psychological evaluations. A forensic psychologist, James Manley, evaluated Joshua and discovered concerning patterns. Joshua denied having any normal human flaws or weaknesses and displayed highly controlling behavior toward his sons. He also exhibited signs of deep paranoia, frequently blaming the police and media for his difficulties. Despite these findings, there was no direct evidence of abuse. Therefore, Manley allowed Joshua to visit his sons several times a week under the supervision of a social worker. However, in January 2012, everything changed. When examining computers seized from Joshua's home, police found about 400 images of child abuse, bestiality, and incest. The images had been cached from a previous owner, but Joshua had viewed them. Although they weren't illegal, the psychologist handling his case was deeply concerned. Joshua was ordered to undergo a full psychological evaluation and a polygraph test. As the pressure mounts, Joshua becomes desperate and is about to commit a horrific act that no one could have imagined. On February 5, 2012, social worker Elizabeth Griffin Hall pulled up to Joshua's house in South Hill, Washington, for what was supposed to be a routine supervised visit between him and his two young boys, Charlie and Braden. The court had ordered these visits to be monitored for the children's safety, so Hall was there to ensure everything went smoothly. However, the moment she arrived, something felt off. As soon as the boys reached the front door, Joshua yanked them inside and slammed it shut right in Hall's face. She barely had time to react before she heard the deadbolt click. She pounded on the door, shouting for him to open it, but he didn't respond. Panicked, she pulled out her phone and called 911. Her voice shook as she told the dispatcher what had just happened, that she was supposed to be supervising the visit, that Joshua had locked her out, and that she feared for the boys' safety. She begged them to send help quickly. Immediately afterwards, a terrible explosion occurred, shaking the house. The force of the explosion propelled Hall backward. Within seconds, flames erupted, engulfing the home in thick black smoke. The intense heat scorched the air around her, leaving her immobilized by fear. Neighbors rushed over, some shouting and others already calling emergency services, but it was too late. The fire spread rapidly, and there was no chance for anyone inside to escape alive. Investigators later confirmed their initial suspicions. Joshua had planned this act. It wasn't an accident or a tragic gas leak. He had doused the house in gasoline, turning it into a death trap. Officially, Charlie and Braden died from carbon monoxide poisoning, but the reality was more horrific. Joshua had attacked them with a hatchet before starting the fire. The day before the tragedy, he emptied his bank account, donated the boys' toys to charity, and sent cold, emotionless goodbye emails to family and friends. Charlie and Braden were buried beside their mother, whom they would never see again, but their family's struggle continued. A year after Joshua took the lives of his two young sons and himself, his brother Michael tragically followed suit. On February 11, 2013, he ended his own life. His ending his own life sparked even more suspicion. In 2012, police questioned him several times about his abandoned Ford Taurus, which was found at a wrecking yard in Oregon. When asked why he left it there, he was vague and did not provide clear answers. Investigators later indicated they believed both Joshua and Michael were involved in Susan's murder. Despite extensive searching, Susan's case remained unsolved and hopeless. By May 21, 2013, the West Valley City Police officially closed the investigation into her disappearance. In the same year, James Manley, the psychologist who assessed Joshua for the state of Washington, acknowledged that he had always suspected Joshua was connected to Susan's disappearance. However, he did not include these suspicions in his official report, as his role was to evaluate Joshua's parenting, not to investigate a crime. The legal dispute over Susan's estate continued for years. In March 2015, Susan's father, Chuck Cox, finally prevailed in a lengthy legal battle against Terica and Alina Powell, who had attempted to declare Susan legally dead in order to collect life insurance. As a result, Chuck gained full control of the estate. In 2019, a surprising revelation came to light. KSL, a radio station in Salt Lake City, reported on its detailed podcast about Susan's case, called Cold, that disturbing child abuse material found by West Valley City Police, which contributed to Joshua losing custody of his sons, did not actually belong to him. In fact, it wasn't even found on his computer. The explicit images were located on a second-hand computer that Susan had bought from fellow members of her LDS church. The previous owners had viewed the content, but by the time this information surfaced, it was too late to rectify the situation. The damage had already been done. In early 2022, there was one final attempt to locate Susan's remains. A team led by Dave Sparks, known from the TV show Diesel Brothers, searched a remote mine shaft in the Utah desert in hopes of bringing Susan home. They discovered rib bones, what looked like human vertebrae, and pieces of clothing, indicating that someone had died there. The remains were sent for DNA testing, but once again, there was no success. The bones did not belong to Susan, and they were not even human. A pair of pants found with the remains tested positive for male DNA, raising another question: to whom did they belong? More importantly, will Susan Powell ever be found? Many children enjoy attending summer camps, going on trips, or even traveling abroad. These experiences allow them to discover new places and broaden their understanding of the world. However, sometimes these adventures can take a dark turn, leading to serious situations. During the summer, Brittany in France is a beautiful destination and generally considered safe, attracting thousands of schoolchildren from various countries each year. The same was true in 1996. In mid-July, a group of students from Cornwall, England, arrived in France, including a girl named Caroline Dickinson. She was one of 40 children on the trip, accompanied by 5 teachers. At 13 years old, Caroline was an average student. This was her first trip to another European country. She was excited but felt a bit down about going without her friend, and her mother had asked the teacher to look out for her. Nevertheless, Caroline quickly connected with the other children and traveled with the group to a small village named Plain Fougers of Brittany. The trip organizers had arranged for the students' accommodation at a youth hostel. Plain Fougers had only a few shops and bars, with a population of just over 3,000 people. This small, quaint village excited Caroline, as it was her first time visiting such a cozy place. After moving into the hostel for foreign guests on July 18, 1996, Caroline enjoyed making new friends and quickly became close to a girl named Camilla. Unfortunately, they were assigned to different rooms. Camilla's room had 2 bunk beds, both of which were already occupied. Not wanting to go back to her own room, Caroline decided to bring her mattress into Camilla's room. She placed it on the floor between the 2 large beds and chose to spend the night there. Before going to sleep, Camilla and Caroline talked for a long time. The last thing Camilla remembers is singing a song about the stars with Caroline before they both fell asleep. The next morning, when the girls in the room woke up, they found Caroline lying on the floor in an unnatural position, her eyes wide open. They called her name, but she didn't respond. She was already cold. A scream of horror filled the room, drawing the attention of the teachers, who rushed in and were stunned by the sight. They immediately contacted the police. When the gendarmes arrived, they concluded that it was a murder, and the girl had died under horrific circumstances. The entire community of Plain Fougers was left in shock by the tragedy. The event was so traumatic that many found it hard to discuss. Caroline had been abused, and she died from asphyxia caused by a lump of cotton wool lodged deep in her throat, which led to her suffocation. Caroline was known for her diligence. She worked hard and excelled academically. The incident shocked not only the families of the children but also the entire French village, which had never experienced anything like it. The crime had many strange aspects. Most notably, it was hard to understand how the criminal could sneak into a room full of 5 sleeping children and kill one without waking the others. How did he manage to enter the dormitory without being seen by teachers or security? Detectives soon figured out that an outsider could gain access to the building. Fire safety regulations at the time required that entrances and exits remain open, and some were left unmonitored. This meant that anyone could easily enter the building through these doors. After the girls who shared a room with Caroline recovered from the tragedy, the police were finally able to interview them. 2 witnesses reported seeing something unusual that night. One girl woke up in the middle of the night, heard quiet moans, and noticed Caroline's legs twitching. However, she thought her roommate was just having a nightmare and decided not to investigate further. Another girl also woke up around the same time and saw a shadow move across the room toward the exit. She assumed it was one of the other girls going to the bathroom. There were no screams or anything else alarming that would have drawn anyone's attention. A development built on witness testimonies that, on the night of July 18th, Caroline chose to sleep on the floor between her friends' bunk beds so she could be close to them. Around 4 a.m., an unknown man entered the dormitory through an unlocked door. He went upstairs and found Caroline asleep on the floor. He placed a large wad of cotton in her mouth, likely to silence her, then assaulted and abused her. After killing her, he left the scene. At that same time, one of the teachers was awakened by a suspicious noise and looked out the dormitory window. She saw a stranger riding away on a motorcycle but thought he was just passing by. After seeing the stranger, she checked the sleeping areas but didn't notice anything unusual. All the children appeared to be sleeping peacefully. She chose not to turn on the lights or wake anyone, believing there was no reason to do so, and returned to her bed. The murder investigation was carried out quietly, with minimal information released. This approach was in stark contrast to similar cases in England, where press conferences were held, and the public was actively engaged to help gather information. With no new information, it appeared that the case had hit a dead end. After all required examinations, the body of Caroline was returned to her parents in England. Many people attended her funeral, hoping the criminal would be caught soon. Unfortunately, in the months that followed, no suspects emerged. The investigation stalled, and even after a year, there was still no progress. Many criticized the French police for their poor handling of the case and lack of professionalism. Caroline's parents, John and Sue, and their daughter Jenny, had made the harrowing journey to France. They returned to the small village in Brittany on the anniversary of his daughter's death. He was frustrated by the detectives' lack of communication and their failure to engage the public in the investigation. He made a public appeal for help, urging the local community to remember the tragic events surrounding the death of his 13-year-old daughter. John called on residents to share any information they might have about the case, hoping to find the person responsible. Caroline's father were astonished to find out that no fingerprints had been collected from the crime scene. In the early stages of the investigation, officers simply went door to talk to local residents. However, the lead detective refused to collect DNA samples from all the men in the village, even though the number of men was small. This refusal seemed unreasonable, especially given the specific nature of the killer's actions. John believed that the perpetrator lived nearby, was familiar with the area, and could easily come and go without being noticed. As John examined the French police procedures more closely, their frustration grew. In the end, he decided to reach out to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to request pressure on the French authorities for a more comprehensive investigation. Thanks to the campaign he initiated, his request was approved in August 1997, which led to significant media pressure on the gendarmes. This situation even resulted in the dismissal of the detectives who were responsible for the initial investigation in France. The new lead detective quickly concentrated on the early mistakes made in the case. They chose to reassess the limited evidence and review most of the information. However, with over a year having passed since the murder, this task proved to be quite challenging. Key witnesses were interviewed again, and based on their statements, a new composite sketch of the suspected killer was created. All information was made public promptly to prevent the same mistakes from happening again. The court also approved the victims' parents' request for DNA testing of all the men in the town where their daughter was killed. This was the first mass DNA testing conducted in the history of forensic science in Britain. Caroline's father had previously believed that the attacker was a local resident, but the testing ultimately revealed no matches. Investigators were compelled to adopt new strategies and consider events beyond the village. During this process, a new detective uncovered a troubling link to an incident in the nearby village of St. Lenaire. On the night Caroline Dickinson was murdered, an unknown man had entered a youth hostel in St. Lenaire where students were staying. The intruder entered a room where 4 teenagers were sleeping but was quickly spotted. Lights were turned on, causing chaos that forced him to flee. Following a failed abuse attempt in a field, the suspect had allegedly traveled 25 kilometers in search of a new victim. Unfortunately, this crucial lead was overlooked during the initial investigation, as no one was harmed in this incident, resulting in very few details about the man. Detectives focused on the 4 witnesses from the youth hostel who had seen the likely assailant clearly in the light. Once located and interviewed, their insights helped refine a composite sketch of the suspect. As details about the mysterious abuser circulated across France, authorities alerted all youth hostels and dormitories about the situation. They also collected information on similar crimes from comparable organizations. Although data was scarce, the number of potential suspects gradually increased. By the end of 1997, approximately 3,000 local men were identified as possible offenders. To definitively determine the killer's identity, all must undergo testing and DNA profiling. This extensive process took nearly 2 years, as investigators treated the case with utmost seriousness. After some time, investigators repeatedly encountered the name Francisco Arce Montes. He is a 47-year-old Spanish citizen with a long history of criminal activity across several European countries. His first arrest was in Germany during the 1980s, where he received a 5-year sentence for abuse. Following that, he carried out an attack in the Netherlands, resulting in a few months of imprisonment. In 1994, he was arrested in France for attempting to assault a girl at a youth hostel. His appearance matched the composite sketch created from witness descriptions. Upon examining his criminal history, detectives discovered at least 10 similar incidents across Europe, all involving the abuse of girls and teenagers in youth hostels. Unfortunately, tracking him down proved difficult since he was a migrant, continuously moving between countries and making it possible for him to be anywhere in Europe or beyond. By the end of the 1990s, Francisco had gained notoriety among law enforcement agencies throughout Europe. He emerged as the prime suspect among the various candidates. To focus solely on him and rule out the others, it was essential to apprehend Francisco and obtain a DNA sample from him. Meanwhile, testing continued, and gradually, the list of 3,000 suspects was narrowed down, eliminating individuals one by one. Francisco managed to evade capture so effectively that, at one point, even the victim's parents began to question if he would ever be found. In March, a group of Irish students went on vacation and stayed at a youth hostel near the beach. That evening, an unknown man entered one of their rooms, but 2 female students caught him. He insisted he had entered the wrong room by mistake and quickly left. Although the girls were worried about what had happened, they chose not to report the incident, assuming the man was simply confused because he was drunk. The next day, this man was seen in the same hostel. He was found in one of the rooms and acting suspiciously around 2 a.m. Shortly after, he left, claiming he had confused the rooms. 4 girls who witnessed this immediately called emergency services to report a break-in and an abuse. One of the girls stated that she had been abused while she slept. She provided her underwear for examination and consented to all necessary tests. The police caught the mysterious criminal after one of the Irish students recognized him the following day. The girl was in the room that was broken into yesterday and noticed the suspicious man walking around the pool as if nothing had happened. She immediately called 911, and he was arrested. He was taken to the Miami Beach Police Department for questioning. The man denied being involved in the suspicious activities at the youth hostel over the past few days. During his interview with law enforcement, he eventually provided his real name, Francisco Montes. He claimed to be a solo traveler who had spent considerable time in South America and European countries, including Germany and France, and was currently traveling around the United States. During his conversation with the detectives, he made several strange, claiming he hadn't committed any crime and that he had merely entered other people's rooms by accident while drunk. Francisco repeatedly asked, in anger, whether masturbation was illegal in the United States, suggesting that his actions weren't harmful. His behavior was both provocative and odd. He ultimately took a DNA test and was held for further investigation. By this time, Caroline's murder had gone cold, until Tommy Onko, an immigration officer at the Detroit airport, picked up a British newspaper and read a story about the 5th anniversary of the unsolved murder. The article named Montes as a possible suspect, and on a whim, Onko decided to look up immigration information to see if a man by that name had ever been to the United States. He found the name of Francisco Arce Montes, who was in fact in police custody in Miami Beach. Onko contacted French and British authorities and was able to confirm Francisco's date of birth and hometown. Meanwhile, Montes was arrested in Miami Beach for abusing an Irish tourist at a youth hostel. The crime was similar to the modus operandi in Caroline's case, with Montes being able to enter the girls' rooms without waking the victim or her roommate. Francisco was arrested by Sergeant, later Major, Angel Vasquez of the Miami Beach Police Department. Major Vasquez obtained a DNA sample from Montes, which matched the DNA from the male fluid at the Irish students' youth hostel. In addition, Major Vasquez linked Montes to 4 other similar incidents in Miami Beach. Combined with Onko's sources, investigators linked Francisco to Caroline's murder. Francisco's DNA was later matched to DNA from the Caroline Dickinson murder investigation. The state of Florida suspended charges against Francisco to allow for his extradition to France to face charges for Caroline's murder. Finally, there was a genuine possibility of solving Caroline's murder. The major obstacle was the distance. At any moment, Francisco could be released on bail and vanish, traveling anywhere in the world. They began communicating with detectives in France through the former consul. Their concerns were finally alleviated when they received confirmation of Francisco's name and date of birth, which matched the information held by French authorities. It was discovered that Francisco had traveled around Europe before coming to the United States, where he was working as a truck driver. In March 2001, Francisco was arrested in Florida and identified as the main suspect in the murder of Caroline Dickinson, which occurred in France 5 years earlier. At this point, the young women who had been attacked in Miami recognized Francisco as the intruder who had broken into their dorm rooms, enabling the authorities to detain him. DNA from bodily fluids found on Caroline's body was sent to France for testing to confirm a match. This was a critical moment for European investigators and Caroline's parents. A few days later, the test results revealed an almost 100% match. Francisco Montes was extradited from the United States to France after 6 months, and it took another 2 years for him to confess to his crimes. He admitted to abusing a 13-year-old girl in France but claimed that Caroline Dickinson's death was accidental. Francisco argued that he had a mental illness, which he believed made him unaccountable for his actions. However, his attempt to avoid punishment due to insanity was unsuccessful. Experts concluded he was sane and capable of standing trial following several assessments. During the trial, he rarely spoke, mostly in Spanish, and appeared calm, showing no remorse for his actions. He was required to testify, and Francisco explained in French how the murder occurred. He stated that the defendant had traveled from Rennes to Plain Fougers with plans to return to England, where he was residing at the time. After getting lost, he sought a place to stay for the night and found the only building in the small village with its lights on, a youth hostel. He entered at night and saw that everyone was asleep. He began to check the rooms and noticed Caroline sleeping on the floor, whom he viewed as an easy target. Francisco approached her, covered her mouth with his hand, and then assaulted her. He ended up abusing her and accidentally killed her with a piece of cotton wool that suffocated her. Panicked, he fled the scene. During the trial, Francisco asked the victim's parents for forgiveness, acknowledging he knows the Dickinson family will never forgive him. The parents of Caroline, who were divorced at the time, along with their youngest daughter, attended the trial and provided testimony. They described their daughter as an innocent girl who wanted to explore the world and travel to different countries. This trip was a step towards fulfilling her dream. The parents had allowed Caroline to go on the trip without any concerns, believing that France was a safe place and that she would be supervised by her teachers. Caroline and her classmates were scheduled to visit various interesting sites. No one could have predicted the tragic outcome of this journey. Had they known, they would never have permitted their daughter to go. They did not forgive the criminal. During the trial, details about the defendant's life were uncovered. His mental health issues began in his teenage years when he started showing symptoms of obsessive-compulsive disorder. He was fixated on cleanliness, using a handkerchief to open doors and turn on lights, avoiding touching anything with his bare hands, meticulously washing everything with mineral water and soap multiple times. At the age of 20, Francisco started experiencing difficulties. After his friends learned about this, they sent him to a psychiatrist, who diagnosed him with depression and progressive schizophrenia. In the mid-1970s, he left Spain and traveled across Europe. He lived a transient lifestyle, working as a waiter, hotel doorman, or driver, but primarily relied on money from his father. An acquaintance noted that Francisco was very familiar with all the youth hostels in Europe and often sought the company of girls, particularly those aged 11 to 12, considering anyone over 20 to be too old for him. His friend also recalled a chilling admission from Francisco, where he expressed that he saw nothing wrong with killing a person. At one point, he had a girlfriend whom he physically abused. She bore him a son but eventually left him due to the violence. Afterward, he went on another trip where he continued to assault and abuse women. On June 14, 2004, following a 3-week trial, Francisco Arce Montes was found guilty of murdering and abusing Caroline Dickinson. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. The victim's parents felt a sense of relief, believing that their 8 years of waiting for justice and their activism had led to the conviction of their daughter's murderer. However, the situation did not end there. After 20 years, he filed an appeal but later withdrew it. Everyone was shocked by the long list of offenses, which took around 10 minutes to read. Over the 20 years before receiving a life sentence, he committed 4 abuses in Germany. South American authorities also believe he abused at least a dozen women within their borders, in addition to attacking many others. Additionally, there was one attempted abuse in France before Caroline's death. It's evident that the true extent of his crimes could have been much larger, but the trial only considered officially recorded cases where victims had reported to the police. Notably, all the other victims survived. Caroline may have been the only one who did not survive after being abused. U.S. detectives investigating his case believe he is linked to a series of abuses and murders in both the U.S. and Europe. His conviction has led to serious questions about why he was not apprehended sooner. He could have been arrested in Spain as early as autumn 1997, a year after Caroline's murder, yet he avoided capture. The lack of cooperation among law enforcement agencies across European countries hindered the process of transferring him to the French gendarmerie. The parents of the victim were troubled by this as well. Despite Francisco's conviction, the victim's mother and father continued to voice their frustration about the insufficient collaboration between international authorities, which allowed criminals to keep committing offenses without facing consequences. The parents of Caroline pushed for the establishment of an international DNA database to help address the situation. Throughout their advocacy, they frequently shared their daughter's story. This case highlighted the importance of collaboration among law enforcement agencies, even across different continents, in stopping dangerous criminals. Francisco's legal troubles continued after Caroline's case. The last people heard from Francisco in 2015, when he was convicted of abusing a young woman, a year after he had killed Caroline. He was extradited to Spain to face charges for the abuse of an 18-year-old girl. He deceived her into allowing him into her apartment building by pretending he had lost his keys. Once inside, he threatened her with a knife and abused her. For this crime, he was extradited and tried in Spain, where he was sentenced to 11 years in prison. He is expected to serve his jail time in Spain once he has been released from prison in France, where he is scheduled to stay until January 2027. Francisco has nearly run out of options for appealing his sentence. His earliest opportunity for release will be in 2038. However, it is improbable that he will live to see his 88th birthday while imprisoned. Marilena Rosari was a 58-year-old woman living with her husband in Castellanza, Italy. They had 2 grown daughters who lived on their own and had children of their own, making Marilena a grandmother. She worked as a promoter in supermarkets located in the province of Varese. By 2017, she viewed herself as a successful individual, enjoying a peaceful life while taking care of her family. On Sunday, July 30, 2017, Marilena and her husband visited a mutual friend's house for dinner in a nearby town. They spent a few hours there before returning home together to Castellanza. It was a typical quiet evening for them. However, once they arrived home, her husband had other plans. He planned to visit his elderly mother in the nearby town, as she was unwell and needed help with housework. He was absent all evening and night, returning home the next morning around 10:30 a.m. He expected to find his wife at home since she usually left for work later. Typically, at that time, she would be enjoying her morning routine, having breakfast, getting ready, and occasionally doing some cleaning. To his surprise, Marilena was missing. Initially, her husband thought she might have gone to work earlier than usual, possibly due to a last-minute request. However, Marilena always communicated any changes to her schedule and would not just disappear without notice. Moreover, that morning, she had planned to spend time with him to discuss their future plans and some important matters. He started to feel anxious and tried to reach Marilena. After several unsuccessful attempts to call her mobile phone, he noticed it was turned off, which was unusual for her as she was always reachable during work hours. When he checked the house, he discovered more worrying signs. Her bag containing personal items and documents was missing, but her car was parked in the yard. This was strange since she never left without her car. Concerned, he went outside to look around the neighborhood. He talked to several neighbors who were awake and working in their gardens, but none of them had seen or heard anything unusual. He also called his daughters, but they had not heard from their mother either. Marilena's phone still remained off. Feeling restless, he decided to contact the police. However, they informed him that they could not file a missing person report until 24 hours had passed. It was not until July 31st, when he returned to the police station, that his report was finally accepted and the search began. During this time, he couldn't get in touch with Marilena. He reached out to everyone who knew her, including her daughters, relatives, and colleagues, but no one had seen her. By the time the police acknowledged the report of her disappearance, the management and staff at the supermarkets were already worried because she hadn't shown up for work in 2 days. Marilena was known for her punctuality and reliability. She never missed a shift, so her absence raised great concern. The police interviewed all of Marilena's co-workers. They were shocked by her disappearance and found no indications that anything was wrong. No one was aware of any issues she might have been dealing with, nor did it seem like she had plans for a long trip or any reason to leave unexpectedly. The last person to see and talk to Marilena was her husband, making him the first person law enforcement wanted to question. Detectives interviewed him multiple times to understand what happened before her disappearance. They aimed to find out if the couple had any issues that might have led Marilena to leave or if anyone harbored ill will toward her. Her husband found these suggestions ridiculous and dismissed them, stating that their family had never been involved in crime or shady activities, and they did not have any enemies. Detectives interviewed Marilena's friends and found that they had no useful information. Her husband mentioned one concerning detail: the family was facing financial troubles, owing €10,000 to the bank. However, this lead seemed unhelpful since they were consistently making payments on the loan. He also provided documentation proving that both he and Marilena were fulfilling their financial obligations without issues. The police explored various possibilities, ranging from a voluntary disappearance to a potential crime, but after several days, they had no concrete answers. Meanwhile, Marilena had not used her phone or bank cards, raising concerns about her well-being, as it's difficult for anyone to survive long without money, a phone, or a car. A press conference was held to gather more information about Marilena's disappearance, and a television appeal was broadcasted to raise awareness. The prosecutor's office requested a detailed description of the missing woman, which was shared on all channels along with a call for eyewitnesses to come forward. Unfortunately, this effort did not lead to any new information. To assist with the search, specially trained dogs were brought in. The dogs were taken around the house and the area by the gate, but they remained calm and did not indicate any scent. The courtyard and Marilena's car were also searched without any success. Additionally, Marilena's relatives appeared on television, made several public statements, and directly reached out to her in hopes of getting a response. Days went by, but Marilena was still missing. The critical timeframe for finding her alive had passed, and anxiety deepened as troubling thoughts arose. Her husband and daughters felt increasingly worried. Law enforcement still issued a nationwide appeal through various media to widen the search efforts. Meanwhile, relatives created and distributed flyers featuring Marilena's photo throughout the city. A week later, the police had almost lost hope of finding her alive and shifted their focus to the surrounding area, trying to identify anyone who might have been involved in her possible murder or kidnapping. Naturally, close relatives, especially her husband, became suspects. He was the last known person to have spent time with her. He claimed he was at his mother's house during the time she went missing, which raised suspicions. After appearing on television, he acted cautiously, seemingly avoiding drawing attention to himself. He explained this behavior by saying he wanted to evade media scrutiny, but law enforcement grew suspicious that there might be a more concerning reason behind his actions. Consequently, they began to investigate him more thoroughly. Detectives confirmed that the evening after her husband brought her home, he went to help his sick mother with housework. Neighbors saw them arrive together, and several witnesses confirmed that he left almost immediately afterward. He was not seen again until the next morning. Neighbors near his mother's house also supported his story, stating he arrived late in the evening, and the timing matched perfectly. CCTV cameras along the road recorded his car traveling to and from his mother's house at the times he mentioned. His alibi appeared solid and did not raise any suspicions. However, investigators were not quick to remove him from the list of suspects, as close acquaintances are often implicated in such cases. Therefore, they returned to that neighborhood hoping to gather more information from former neighbors. Local residents were interviewed, and detectives meticulously investigated Marilena's previous social circle to find any suspicious individuals who might have had an interest in the kidnapping or potential violent actions. At this stage, her husband appeared to be an unlikely suspect for several reasons. He and his wife were widely regarded as loving partners with minimal disagreements. He had no financial incentive to cause her harm, and he had a solid alibi. Meanwhile, the investigation continued to progress as new leads surfaced. After speaking with the couple's acquaintances at their former residence, the Carabinieri shifted their focus to Vito Clerico, a 64-year-old man who was well acquainted with Marilena and her husband, lived nearby. From the outset, Vito displayed a cautious demeanor and seemed anxious. During questioning, he changed his story multiple times, which raised significant suspicions. The investigation team focused on Marilena's neighbor to gather more information. Background checks revealed that he had no criminal record, and his relationship with Marilena did not initially cause any concerns. A mutual friend mentioned that they met at work when Marilena was a promoter at shopping centers. This was Vito working as a storekeeper at Marilena's workplace. Their jobs frequently brought them together, leading to regular communication. The friend described Vito as irresponsible, noting that he had a history of borrowing large amounts of money from others and either not repaying it or repaying it late. There were also rumors that Marilena had lent him money during their time together, which could suggest a possible motive for the crime. As a result, he was called in for questioning. During the interview at the station, Vito described receiving a call from Marilena on the night she disappeared. She asked to meet him at the station in Garbagnac Milanese, explaining that her husband was visiting his sick mother and could not assist her. She mentioned having important business in the city. Vito, being friends with her, agreed to meet, but Marilena never showed up. Initially, he thought she changed her mind and went home. However, several aspects of his story seemed suspicious. First, the timing was too late for any business dealings. Second, the timeline Vito provided did not align with the information the police had confirmed. According to the timeline, Marilena should have been preparing to go to the station while she was with her friends, but no one confirmed that she had any plans to go anywhere or contacted anyone. Additionally, since her husband was nearby, she could have asked him for help. All of this seemed illogical. Due to these inconsistencies, detectives decided to investigate Vito's account further. They discovered that his mobile phone was never registered on the route he claimed to have taken. Furthermore, he was not seen on any surveillance cameras, including those at the station. If Vito was telling the truth, he should have appeared on video. The most intriguing discovery was that the detectives found a woman in the recordings who looked like Marilena. This indicated that she had indeed visited Garbagnac Milanese, from which she never returned. Upon examining Vito's mobile phone, the detectives confirmed that he had received several calls in the days leading up to her disappearance. Marilena had repeatedly tried to contact him, but he had consistently ignored her. However, on the night she disappeared, there was no call from her to him. Instead, there was a single outgoing call from Vito to her number on the evening of July 30th, 2017. This evidence directly contradicted his account of events. During the conversation, one of the detectives spotted dark red stains on Vito's trousers that looked like blood. Vito quickly claimed that he raised rabbits and that the stains might have come from butchering one of them, as he owned around 40 rabbits. However, the police doubted his story, confiscated the trousers, and sent them to a lab for testing. The analysis confirmed that the stains were human blood, specifically matching that of Marilena. Vito was unable to explain this finding. On September 11, 2017, he was arrested, 40 days after Marilena had disappeared. He was charged with murder and concealing her body. During interrogations, Vito provided confusing and inconsistent accounts that varied from day to day, filled with odd details, but he did not provide any clear confessions or truth. Eventually, he was worn down and agreed to tell investigators where Marilena's body, while still denying that he was the murderer. He claimed he helped the real killer hide her body out of fear for himself and his wife. Vito was compelled to assist in disposing of a body, and he kept the identity of Marilena's killer a secret. On September 12, authorities began excavating his backyard, specifically in a small garden in Garbagnac Milanese. At the exact spot Vito indicated, they found a shallow grave approximately 40 centimeters deep. Inside, they discovered a decapitated body wrapped in multiple layers of polyethylene and placed in a bag, which was partially covered in concrete. The advanced decomposition of the remains and the missing head complicated the identification process. Although the clothing resembled Marilena's, there were no identifying features, like tattoos, scars, or fractures, to confirm her identity. As a result, identification needed to be made using dental records. In the meantime, police continued to search for the missing head. Vito, for unknown reasons, refused to cooperate with law enforcement. His behavior was quite unusual, leading them to suspect he might be feigning mental disorders to claim insanity during the trial and evade punishment for the murder. It was revealed that he had been diagnosed with minor mental health issues in the past and had taken medication, but he had recently stopped. Eventually, under pressure from detectives, Vito started talking again. He claimed that he not only helped hide Marilena's body but also beheaded her after the murder. He said a certain killer had ordered him to do this. The decapitation was a deliberate act to make identification more difficult. Vito stated that he had thrown the head in a dumpster. Given how much time had passed, it was likely that the head had already been taken to a dump outside the city, making it nearly impossible to find. However, the authorities were skeptical. Every claim he made needed to be verified. While interrogating Vito, the police also spoke with his family members. One of them mentioned that Vito owned several plots of land. He recalled seeing Vito heading toward one of the most remote plots the day after Marilena's disappearance. This plot was an abandoned field located between Garbagnac Milanese and the town where Marilena lived. The suspect owned property there but typically did not visit without a valid reason. The family members speculated that Vito might have gone to this isolated area to dispose of Marilena's head. Before beginning their search for the head, the police rechecked Vito's mobile phone. This allowed them to confirm that he had indeed traveled to that location, helping to narrow down the search area. A large search team was organized, which included specially trained dogs. The task was made more difficult by the thick growth of blackberries in most of the area. The team thoroughly searched the abandoned field. A few hundred meters from the road, they found a bag hidden in the bushes. It was the same bag that Marilena usually took with her for errands and shopping. Inside the bag was Marilena's head. On September 26th, the body was finally confirmed to be that of Marilena Ree, a 58-year-old woman who had been missing. However, one question still lingered: what was the motive behind her murder? It is believed that it was likely connected to financial issues. Investigators discovered that in 2014, Marilena had loaned Vito and his wife a significant amount of money, approximately 80,000 euros, from her savings. Vito had persuaded a mutual acquaintance that he and his wife were struggling with the bank due to overdue loans and were at risk of losing their home. Trusting his word, Marilena lent him the money, believing he was honest. In the following years, Vito repeatedly delayed paying back the debt, relying on Marilena's patience and her lack of urgent financial needs. However, Marilena eventually needed the money and requested a quick repayment. When Vito failed to return the funds, she had to take out a bank loan, planning to pay it off as soon as she received her repayment from Vito. Despite her growing insistence on getting her money back, Vito still did not repay the debt. On that significant evening, after her husband went to visit his mother, Marilena likely chose to confront Vito about the money. It is unclear how she ended up in the nearby city. During their discussion, Vito refused to return the money, which prompted a violent reaction from Marilena. This led to a conflict that escalated into a fight. A forensic expert noted that before Marilena was beheaded, she was hit on the head with a blunt object at least 6 times. The specifics are hard to determine due to multiple fractures in her skull and facial bones. Additionally, the remains had deteriorated significantly, complicating the examination further. After the murder, Vito cut off his victim's head, buried the body in a shallow grave near his house, wrapped it in several layers of plastic, and partially covered it with concrete. He had only a small amount of building materials, which was insufficient to fully hide the burial site. He placed the head inside her bag, took it out of town, and threw it deep into the thorny bushes on his remote property, hoping it would never be discovered. Even though the reconstruction of the events was supported by various pieces of evidence, Vito did not confess to the crime. Searches of his house and car found traces of blood and indirect evidence suggesting that he was not alone in committing the crime. Unfortunately, not all details could be uncovered. Vito completely denied any involvement of his wife or anyone else, claiming that a third party was responsible but refusing to identify them. After several interrogations, he ultimately took the blame for the crime. Vito's defense attorney claimed that his confession was coerced, noting that he had been questioned at least 10 times and believed his rights were violated. Initially, he only admitted to hiding the remains but did not confess to murder. However, he later claimed to have killed Marilena. Eventually, his story changed again, and he denied everything. The lawyer suggested that someone else must have committed the crime, indicating the possible involvement of a third party. However, this theory could not be supported by witnesses or the evidence gathered. Without any solid leads on the identity of this mysterious person, the idea was dismissed. All of Vito's inconsistent statements, which raised suspicions among investigators, were attributed to an effort to protect his wife. The next step focused on Vito's mental state. Psychiatric evaluations were performed, which found no significant issues. The prosecution claimed that the concealed body, beheading, and the discarded bag far from the city pointed to premeditated murder, a well-planned crime. It was clear that the defendant had intentionally lured the victim into a trap. However, despite the strong arguments and evidence, Vito cleverly kept altering his story, apparently aiming to confuse the investigation. In a desperate attempt to defend himself, Vito tried to argue that the prosecution was biased against him. His lawyer suggested this was to make him a scapegoat and resolve the case quickly. The accused also mentioned having amnesia, which he said prevented him from remembering the days surrounding Marilena's murder. He ultimately confessed to hearing voices of demons that had tormented him for years, leading him to kill Marilena. However, these claims were disproven through investigations, and multiple witnesses stated they had never seen him exhibit signs of mental illness. Throughout the investigation, Vito remained calm and did not show signs of significant stress, which is uncommon for someone with mental health issues. The only medical condition identified in him was epilepsy, but he experienced seizures very rarely. Even if they happen more frequently, aggressive behavior is not typical for those with epilepsy. Detectives were intrigued by Vito's desperate attempts to shift the focus away from his wife. From the start, she appeared to be a potential accomplice in the murder. Investigators viewed her as more dominant and assertive than Vito, leading them to suspect she might have been the mastermind behind the crime. As they dug deeper, they uncovered more compelling information. Marilena was not the only woman deceived by Vito. He frequently borrowed large amounts of money from relatives, friends, and colleagues, ranging from 30,000 to 100,000 euros, to finance the construction of his house. This project became an obsession for both Vito and his wife, who had long dreamed of building a grand villa. To achieve their goal, they took on significant debts and loans, often borrowing again just to make payments and delay the associated issues of non-payment. By the time Marilena was murdered, they were under immense pressure from creditors. It is likely that everyone who lent them money was in danger, just as Marilena was. Due to the extensive examinations needed for a thorough investigation of the deceased's body, the burial did not take place until 10 months after the body was found. The funeral was held on June 1, 2018. By the end of January 2019, the trial of Vito began. From the start, his inconsistent statements, confessions, and retractions created a sense of distrust. The defense attorney struggled to effectively counter the prosecution's arguments, achieving only limited success in reducing the charges. Initially, it was thought that the murder involved torture, but a forensic expert later confirmed that the severed head and some of the body mutilations occurred after death. On January 24, 2019, Vito, who is 66 years old, was sentenced to life imprisonment. He appealed the verdict, but his appeal was rejected. Investigations into his wife's possible involvement in Marilena's death are still ongoing. On November 21, 2017, Vito was attacked in prison by his cellmate. His cellmate used a metal plate and a makeshift weapon during the assault. Vito reported that he had tried to stop all communication with his cellmate, who had made clear abuse advances that escalated into harassment. When Vito threatened to report his cellmate's behavior, he was attacked. While in prison, Vito continually expressed his dissatisfaction with the justice system, insisting on his innocence and asking for safety from his hostile cellmate. Despite his requests, he was sent back to prison after receiving treatment. On Sunday, November 29, 2020, he was found dead in the prison toilet. In his hand was a note that powerfully criticized the Italian law enforcement. He died after swallowing a garbage bag, which obstructed his airway and led to suffocation. Many suspect that he did not take his own life and that the incident was planned by his cellmate. In March 2007, the peaceful life of a young English teacher in Japan changed dramatically when she mysteriously vanished. Lindsay and Hawker, a 22-year-old full of promise and dreams, had come to Japan to start an exciting new chapter. However, what began as a hopeful adventure quickly turned into a tragic situation. A chance meeting with a man with sinister motives turned her otherwise enriching experience into a nightmare. As days passed without any news from Lindsay, her colleagues and family grew increasingly worried. Investigators looking into her last known whereabouts discovered a chilling series of events that led them to a shocking crime scene and a clever suspect who managed to evade capture for years. What truly happened to Lindsay? The search for answers would capture the world's attention and reveal the hidden dangers in what appeared to be a safe environment. Lindsay Ann Hawker was born on December 30, 1984, in Coventry, England, to Bill and Julia Hawker. She was the second of 3 siblings and grew up in a nurturing home. From a young age, Lindsay showed remarkable selflessness and compassion, which made her well loved by her classmates and teachers at King Henry VIII School. Former headmaster remembered her as someone who always put others' needs first. Lindsay's kindness went beyond school, as she also volunteered at a local primary school, teaching swimming to children with disabilities. Lindsay was a dedicated reader who often lost herself in books at the library for hours. In 2003, she began studying biology at the University of Leeds, where her hard work and intelligence earned her a first-class degree in 2006. Although she wanted to pursue a master's degree, she preferred to gain practical experience first. Lindsay was an ambitious and lively young woman with a deep love for life. She and her boyfriend had always dreamed of traveling the world together for a year. However, when she got a great opportunity to teach in Tokyo, Japan, she accepted the job and postponed their travels. Her boyfriend planned to join her the following summer to start their long-awaited adventure around the globe. Lindsay was filled with excitement as she prepared for her new adventure in Tokyo, determined to respect the local culture. Before her departure in October 2006, she spent time learning about Japanese customs. At just 22 years old, she arrived in Japan to start a year-long teaching position at Nova, the country's largest private English school, located in Chiba. She reassured her family that Tokyo was a safe and welcoming city. She eagerly looked forward to embracing her new life while building lasting friendships. Although she was thousands of miles away from home, Lindsay remained closely connected with her loved ones in England, regularly using Facebook, WhatsApp, Skype, and phone calls to keep in touch. She was thriving in Japan, adapting well to her new environment. Lindsay shared an apartment in Chiba with two fellow teachers, one from Australia and another from Canada, who quickly became her close friends. 3 months after her arrival, in December 2006, Lindsay's parents, Bill and Julia, and her younger sister traveled to Japan to celebrate her birthday. They celebrated at the famous bar in the Tokyo Park Hyatt. That night, filled with love and laughter, became a treasured memory for Lindsay's family. Tragically, it was the last time they would ever meet her alive. One evening in March 2007, as Lindsay finished her workday and began her journey home, she had a troubling encounter. After taking the train back to Chiba Station, where she normally parked her bicycle, a young man approached her, falsely claiming to be one of her students. Lindsay, who knew all of her students by name, immediately realized he was lying. While she unlocked her bike to ride home, the stranger continued talking to her and followed her as she cycled away, asking numerous questions about her background and clearly trying to keep her engaged. When Lindsay arrived at her apartment, the man made an unusual request for a glass of water. Sensing no immediate danger and knowing that her two roommates went be home, she decided to let him in. Once inside, she introduced him to her roommates, and he asked about private English lessons. According to Nova's rules, tutoring outside of work was permitted if done in a public place and if a record of the student's details was kept. Lindsay agreed to meet him at a cafe and set her usual fee at 3,500 yen, about $32 per hour, which she had charged other students in the past. As he was leaving, he gave her a slip of paper with his name, Tatsuya Ichihashi, along with his email and phone number. To Lindsay's surprise, he had also drawn a portrait of her on the same sheet, which was an unexpected addition to their brief meeting. Tatsuya Ichihashi was born on January 5, 1979, into a privileged family and spent his childhood in Gifu. His parents had demanding medical careers. His father was a doctor, and his mother was a dentist. Although he grew up in a wealthy environment and hoped to follow his father's career path, his academic results were disappointing, preventing him from entering the medical field. After graduating from Chiba University, Ichihashi lacked ambition and relied on his family's wealth instead of finding a job. With a monthly allowance of 100,000 yen, about $920, he lived an unproductive life, appearing content to simply drift along without direction. Former classmates described him as socially withdrawn and fixated on violent manga, while his girlfriend portrayed him as serious and stable. Although he had no formal criminal record, there were concerning signs. He had once been a suspect in an assault and robbery case involving a woman. This incident was never reported to the authorities because his father paid her 1 million yen, approximately $6,800, to drop the matter. Tatsuya Ichihashi was very dedicated to physical fitness, reportedly cycling over 15 miles daily as part of his rigorous workout routine. However, while he was physically strong, his mental health was deteriorating. He shared with friends that he felt increasingly unstable but never sought professional help for his mental issues. Lindsay Hawker's last moments seemed ordinary, but they led to a shocking disappearance. On March 24th, she left her apartment to meet Tatsuya Ichihashi at a cafe for a private English lesson they had scheduled. The meeting seemed to go smoothly until Tatsuya asked her to come with him to his apartment nearby, saying he had forgotten his wallet and needed to pay her. Trusting him, Lindsay agreed, and they took a short taxi ride. When she arrived, she told the driver that she would be back in the car in just a few minutes. However, those minutes turned into an unsettling silence. After waiting for 7 minutes without her return, the taxi driver left, unaware that he had just seen Lindsay Hawker for the last time. Lindsay was living away from home but kept in regular contact with her family and friends in England. When Saturday passed without hearing from her, they thought she was just busy. However, by Sunday, March 25th, they started to worry, as this lack of communication was unusual for her. Back in Japan, her co-workers at Nova grew concerned when she didn't show up for her classes, which was out of character for her. By Monday, March 26th, their worry escalated into panic. Nova staff informed Lindsay's father about her absence, and her roommates reported her missing to the police. At 2:30 p.m., the search for Lindsay Hawker officially began, but the reality of what had happened would turn out to be more shocking than anyone anticipated. The investigation started by examining the available CCTV footage, which provided important insights. In the hours before Lindsay Hawker went missing, the cameras captured her and Tatsuya Ichihashi at the cafe. The footage recorded everything from their drink orders to the personal conversation during her private English lesson with him. It also captured their departure from the cafe and their ride in a taxi to Tatsuya's apartment. After they were dropped off, the taxi waited for 7 minutes because Lindsay had asked the driver to stay parked. However, as time went by and she did not return, the driver eventually left. The next morning, police interviewed Lindsay's roommates, who described a disturbing encounter with a strange man who had come to their apartment. They mentioned that Lindsay had planned to give him private English lessons and provided his contact information written on a piece of paper. At 5:40 p.m., 2 officers were sent to Tatsuya Ichihashi's apartment building in Ichikawa, a quiet suburb near Tokyo. Without enough evidence to enter, the officers relied on the help of his neighbors, who allowed them to access their balcony to look into his living room. Although the lights were off, they could see that someone was inside. What stood out to them was that the bathtub, which is usually fixed in place, was strangely located on the balcony. Given Tatsuya's previous legal issues and their suspicion that he might be holding Lindsay against her will, the police called for additional support. At 7 p.m., 9 officers were positioned outside his building. When Tatsuya unexpectedly came out barefoot and with a backpack, he ran away. Even without shoes, he dashed through the streets and managed to escape the pursuing officers. One officer caught his backpack, which only contained gym clothes. However, Tatsuya quickly jumped off the stairs and blended into the busy streets, avoiding capture. As the police entered Tatsuya's apartment, they went straight to the balcony to examine an oddly placed bathtub. Upon investigation, they found the bathtub filled with a troubling mixture of soil and sand. To their horror, a small white hand was visible above the soil, leading them to the discovery of Lindsay's lifeless naked body. Tatsuya had attempted to hide his horrific crime by mixing a decomposition agent into the soil and planting flower seeds on top, making it look like a harmless flower bed. Lindsay had been gagged with a scarf, her hands and feet were tightly bound with gardening ties. Disturbingly, her head had been shaved, her hair was found stuffed in a nearby plastic bag. The apartment also held various wigs, raising suspicions that Tatsuya might be transgender and intended to use Lindsay's hair for himself. The post-mortem revealed the tragic truth: Lindsay had been strangled. When her body was discovered, it showed evidence of a fierce struggle. Her upper body had large, bag-sized bruises, likely from numerous punches during a prolonged attack. Other marks indicated that she had been kicked or hit with a blunt object, and there were signs she had been slammed into furniture in her apartment. The defensive wounds on her arms indicated that Lindsay fought hard to defend herself, but in the end, she was overpowered and strangled. Neighbors reported hearing disturbing sounds on the night she went missing, such as loud thumps resembling heavy objects hitting metal, followed by noises that sounded like dragging. Investigators found out that Tatsuya had visited a local hardware store multiple times. He bought items like the soil and sand that were later discovered in the bathtub, which suggested the murder was premeditated. Meanwhile, Bill was heading to Tokyo to identify his daughter. Upon seeing her, he instantly recognized it was Lindsay. "She was my daughter. She was so tall and beautiful. She had been beaten so badly. My life and my soul just shattered," he shared with the media, his heart breaking at the sight of her. Tatsuya was still on the run, and authorities were actively trying to find him. They distributed wanted posters showing him in different disguises, including as a woman, across the country. However, despite thorough searches, the investigation was progressing slowly. A raid on a hotel close to his home was unsuccessful, and reported sightings in Kabuki-cho led to nothing. By March 2009, marking the second anniversary of Lindsay's tragic death, the search for her killer had not produced any results. In a final effort to raise awareness, life-sized cutouts of Tatsuya were created, but they had little effect on the investigation. In November 2009, authorities finally made a significant breakthrough in the search for Tatsuya. He was identified at a cosmetic surgery clinic in Nagoya, where he had undergone a procedure to slim and lengthen his nose. This was not his first attempt to change his looks. Tatsuya had performed several surgeries on himself in a desperate bid to avoid being caught. He had made his lower lip thinner, altered his eyelids, and removed visible moles from his wanted posters. However, some moles still remained, and this discrepancy led the clinic to recognize him. They sent photos of Tatsuya's altered appearance to the police. In response, authorities released a photo of him taken before and after his latest surgery, warning the public about his changed appearance. As the media showcased his new appearance, Tatsuya realized that the investigation was picking up pace. To evade capture, he bought a disguise that included a beard, sideburns, and a mustache. Despite his attempts to blend in, a sharp-eyed member of the public recognized him. After more than 2 years on the run, Tatsuya's situation changed on November 10, 2009, when investigators received an anonymous tip about a man resembling the fugitive at a ferry terminal. Officers quickly responded and arrested him in Osaka as he tried to board a ferry to Okinawa. His identity was confirmed through fingerprint analysis once he was in custody. At first, Tatsuya remained silent and uncooperative during the early days of his detention. However, when faced with the possibility of the death penalty, he ultimately confessed to killing Lindsay but claimed that it was not deliberate. In July 2011, when Tatsuya's trial started, he focused on a defense claiming that Lindsay's death was accidental. On the witness stand, he recounted the terrible events of that day, stating that he had unintentionally strangled her while trying to quiet her screams during the attack. He even claimed in court, in front of Lindsay's mourning family, that he attempted to revive her after realizing she was no longer breathing. Before the trial began, Tatsuya wrote a letter to Lindsay's family seeking their forgiveness, aware that this gesture could lead to a lighter sentence in Japan. In the letter, he conveyed his deep regret, stating, "I alone am to blame. I will take full responsibility. I will never forget what I did to her, and I will carry this burden for the rest of my life." He expressed sorrow for the impact of his actions, saying that he not only ruined her life but also altered theirs, and acknowledged that he would likely never be forgiven. On July 21, 2011, the Chiba District Court sentenced Ichihashi to life in prison for the murder of Lindsay and Hawker. Although Hawker's family requested the death penalty, the court deemed it inappropriate, considering Ichihashi's clean criminal record and the fact that, at 32 years old, he still had a chance for rehabilitation. In Japan, capital punishment is rarely applied in cases involving a single victim. Additionally, Tatsuya's youth and clean record led authorities to consider the possibility of rehabilitation, although it remains unclear if he can truly be rehabilitated. In April 2012, Tatsuya's defense team filed an appeal, arguing once more that Lindsay's death was an unfortunate accident. However, the court reaffirmed its original decision, stating that Tatsuya had acted with intent and that the murder was premeditated. His appeal was quickly denied. Tatsuya Ichihashi became eligible for parole in 2022, but there is no public information indicating that he has been considered for release. In Japan, inmates serving life sentences can apply for parole after 10 years, but the likelihood of approval depends on their behavior and perceived rehabilitation while incarcerated. The tragic disappearance of Lindsay and Hawker has left a lasting impact on her family, friends, and many others who followed her distressing story. Lindsay was a vibrant young woman full of promise. Her kindness and ambition taken from the world in a shocking act of violence. For years, her loved ones endured the pain of uncertainty and the agonizing wait for justice. With unwavering determination, Lindsay's family relentlessly urged authorities to act, their voices united in hope and resilience, which ultimately led to the capture and conviction of her murderer. However, even after the verdict, no sentence could heal the deep sorrow of losing her. Lindsay's story highlights the hidden dangers, reminding us of the importance of staying alert in our lives. It also demonstrates the incredible strength of a family that would not give up, ensuring that Lindsay's memory lives on. As of 2023, Ichihashi is serving his sentence at Nagano Prison. Addiction can completely dominate a person's mind and will, leading them to engage in disturbing, harmful behaviors. This dependency can stem from various sources, such as alcohol, banned substance, gambling, or even unhealthy relationships, and its impacts can be equally damaging. While some people eventually recognize that they have become trapped by their addictions, many others ignore the problem. Unfortunately, this denial often leads to a worsening situation. The tragic story of Dana Munda and Ghulam Munda is not an isolated case. In 2005, it sent shockwaves through the peaceful town of Hermitage. They was well known and admired by locals, almost like celebrities. Ghulam was a respected physician who owned his clinic, while Dana was exceptionally beautiful and nearly 24 years younger than him. To everyone who knew them, they appeared to have a perfect and successful relationship. However, on a warm day in May, a single gunshot shattered this facade, revealing a much darker reality marked by betrayal, dependency, and greed. Ghulam grew up in the slums of Gujarat, India. From a young age, he faced the harsh realities of poverty and hunger. These tough conditions shaped his strong character, motivated him to escape poverty and create a better life for himself. He worked hard, focused on excellence, and aspiring to become a doctor. After completing high school, Ghulam was accepted into a medical university, where he quickly became one of the top students. His hard work paid off when he was offered an internship at a prestigious clinic in the United States. There, he worked in the urology department and quickly gained a reputation as a promising young specialist with a bright future. After his internship, Ghulam received an attractive job offer and chose to remain in the U.S. He also began applying for U.S. citizenship. By the mid-1970s, he had moved to Hermitage, Pennsylvania, a small town with a population of just over 16,000. There, he opened his own clinic specializing in urological care. His career quickly flourished. Ghulam became a top professional, utilizing advanced technology and the latest equipment in his practice. His clinic gained a reputation as one of the best in the state. He accepted the most difficult and seemingly hopeless cases, attracting patients from both near and far, including overseas. Dr. Ghulam was well respected not only for his medical skills but also for his kindness. He frequently provided free medical care and often paid for expensive medications for patients who couldn't afford them. His compassion was rooted in his own challenging childhood, which motivated him to help others in need. With a prosperous medical practice, Ghulam enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle. He purchased an opulent home in a prestigious area and embraced a life filled with enjoyment. He believed in making the most of life and investing in what made him happy, such as gourmet food, traveling, luxury watches, rare collectibles, high-end cars, and spending time with attractive companions. In his 40s, Ghulam was still single when he noticed a young woman named Dana walking down the street and fell for her immediately. Dana was 24 years younger than him. She came from a religious Catholic family and had just graduated from high school when she met him. At first, she was hesitant about his interest, but over time, she accepted his generous gifts and let him pursue her. Donna's family struggled financially and couldn't afford a prestigious college education. When Ghulam found out about her situation, he offered to pay for her tuition because she wanted to work in healthcare. He supported her journey to become a registered nurse and later funded her master's degree in anesthesiology. Donna and her partner's romantic, Ghulam, relationship started several years after their initial meeting. Interestingly, even though they had strong religious values, Donna's parents accepted their relationship. They appreciated the kind, generous doctor who had helped support their daughter's education and overall well-being. Donna later became a highly skilled nurse anesthetist, secured a job at a prominent medical center. Ghulam continued to encourage her ambitions, supported her career advancement. They lived in Ghulam's luxurious home, where he gave Donna to an expensive car, lavish jewelry, and trips to fancy vacation destinations. When Donna turned 30, Ghulam, who was 54 at the time, proposed to her, and she accepted. They celebrated their engagement with an extravagant wedding ceremony that had over 150 guests, including family, friends, and many of Ghulam's business associates. It appeared that they were on their way to a long, happy life together. Initially, everything seemed perfect. Donna and Ghulam gained fame as local celebrities and were probably the richest people in their town. They enjoyed a luxurious life, traveling frequently, and the doctor generously indulged his much younger wife. They frequently attended charity galas and was always spotted together at public events. Donna chose to prioritize her career and took her time before starting a family. Ghulam supported her decision without any pressure. Many saw Donna as cheerful, friendly, and lively, which was the image she projected, until tragedy started to turn her life upside down. At 37 years old, Donna lost her father after a long illness, which hit her hard. She had always had a close bond with him, referring to herself as a daddy's girl and seeing him as her main source of strength. After he died, Donna became deeply depressed. She isolated herself from others. Ghulam did his best to support her, fulfilling all her wishes, including a trip to Hawaii to help her feel better. However, nothing seemed to work except for antidepressants, which she started taking in larger doses. Donna immersed herself in work, hoping to find solace in her daily routine, but it didn't truly alleviate her suffering. A few years later, she was diagnosed with a kidney condition that caused intense back pain. Even though her husband was a well-known urologist, he couldn't fully relieve her discomfort. The treatments only offered temporary relief, and her symptoms kept coming back, often worse than before. In her desperation, Donna started to rely heavily on strong pain medication. She began secretly taking doses from her workplace, where she was responsible for managing and administering medications. This made it easy for her to take small amounts without being noticed. She would quietly use portions meant for patients, just enough so that no one would realize. Together with her antidepressants, the prescription painkillers dulled her physical and emotional pain. Donna felt abandoned by the world and overwhelmed by her struggles. As a result, she began to distance herself from Ghulam, even though he genuinely cared for her. Things quickly deteriorated. She became increasingly dependent on her medications, to the point where she could not function without them. This led her to raise her dosages and steal more often. Eventually, her behavior attracted attention. She was caught in the act, and there was no way to deny it. Her dismissal from the clinic was shocking, and she faced multiple criminal charges. Ghulam quickly intervened to defend his wife, managed the situation to safeguard her reputation. Thanks to his actions, their friends and family never learned about Donna's problem. Rather than facing jail time, she paid a hefty fine and committed to rehabilitation at a specialized center. Ghulam chose the facility himself and organized Donna's stay, informing relatives, neighbors, and friends that she was on vacation. No one doubted him. He stayed calm, convincing, continued to appear cheerful and friendly. At the rehab center, Donna, who is now in her 40s, met a younger man named Damien Bradford, who was 23 years old. Damien had a history of multiple offenses for distributing illegal substances and ended up in rehab after a serious overdose that almost killed him. Despite their age difference, Donna and Damien quickly became very close, spent a lot of time together. They faced similar challenges. Although their relationship was unexpected, their bond deepened rapidly. What started as simple conversations turned into a passionate affair. Donna's husband was nearing 70 years old. Due to his age and health problems, their physical relationship had significantly diminished. In contrast, Damien was young, energetic, fit, and undeniably attractive. He dedicated a lot of time to the gym, often used steroids and various supplements to maintain his physique. It's unclear why Damien was attracted to a woman 2 decades his senior, but for Donna, he felt like a breath of fresh air, rekindling emotions she thought were long gone. She fully embraced this connection, quickly became emotionally invested. Even though the rehabilitation center had strict rules prohibiting romantic relationships among patients, the two secretly began dating. They found secluded spots to meet, such as storage rooms and restrooms. The thrill of being caught only seemed to strengthen their connection. Donna became so invested in the relationship that she couldn't envision her life without him. Their romance continued after they left the rehab facility. Damien was a caring partner who gave Donna plenty of attention, called her sweet names, and truly enjoyed making her feel valued. He may have developed genuine feelings for Donna, a sophisticated and self-assured woman who clearly looked after herself. At this point, Donna was not working anymore but had complete access to her husband's bank accounts and could spend as she pleased. Ghulam never scrutinized her spending or asked about her expenses. Taking advantage of this, Donna started showering Damien with lavish gifts, designer clothes, and accessories, while also covering all of his living expenses. She even rented a cozy apartment for them to meet privately. As a result, Damien became financially dependent on his wealthy partner, but neither of them appeared to have any concerns about it. When warned about his wife's affair, Ghulam had long suspected that something was off and noticed changes in Donna's behavior, but he had decided not to confront her about it. He realized that she was much younger and had emotional and physical needs that he could no longer fulfill. Gradually, he accepted that their passion had faded. Instead of reacting angrily, he calmly asked Donna if they should consider ending their relationship. Donna was shocked to learn that Ghulam knew about her affair. She explained that it was merely a temporary distraction that happened during a tough period in her life. She had met the younger man while in rehab, when she was feeling vulnerable and needed support. He seemed to understand her struggles better than anyone else. Despite this, she assured Ghulam that he was still the person she loved, promised to end her relationship with the younger man, emphasizing that he didn't truly matter to her. Ghulam felt moved by her words. He chose to trust her, forgave her, and decided they could move forward together as if nothing had happened. Damien had become Donna's overwhelming dependency, which she couldn't easily escape. She felt a strong attraction to him and, in his presence, experienced feelings of youth, desire, and genuine care. Her thoughts were focused on one main goal, eliminating the obstacle to her happiness, her husband. The affair continued at the apartment she had rented for Damien. Although they were more cautious now, Ghulam believed their relationship was over, while Donna planned to maintain it. When they couldn't meet in person, they stayed in constant contact, calling up to 20 times a day and exchanging hundreds of messages. Donna had no plans to let go of her boyfriend. Donna had selfish reasons for not wanting a divorce. She feared losing her financial stability. Before marrying Ghulam, they signed a prenuptial agreement that would limit her settlement to $250,000 if they separated. However, after Ghulam found out about her infidelity, he tried to keep the situation under control and offered to raise her settlement to $1 million. Donna turned down the offer, persuading Ghulam that she still loved him and wished to save their marriage. In reality, though, Ghulam's wealth had increased to nearly $12 million. Motivated by greed, Donna wanted everything, immediate access to wealth so she and Damien could live the way they wanted without restrictions. Every time they met, Donna portrayed Ghulam as a controlling tyrant who emotionally suffocated her and treated her like an object. She wanted Damien to see her husband as an enemy who deserved revenge for the emotional pain he supposedly caused her. Her manipulative stories worked well. A dark plan began to form in Donna's troubled mind, one she intended to execute with the help of her young lover. She believed that since Ghulam was much older and had several chronic health issues, his time was running out anyway. So, she thought, why not hasten the inevitable? To Donna, this seemed like the ideal solution. No one would disrupt her new life, and she would legally inherit all of Ghulam's assets, properties, and wealth as his surviving spouse. She shared her plan with Damien, offering him half of Ghulam's fortune in exchange for his help with a problem. Damien quickly agreed. The promise of a large payout clouded his judgment. Together, they began devising the crime. People who knew Ghulam were aware that he often carried a large amount of cash in his wallet. He frequently joked that anyone who tried to rob him would leave satisfied. Donna and Damien decided to exploit this, planning the crime to appear as a failed mugging that escalated into a tragic event. Developing the plan took nearly 2 months, as Donna and her accomplice carefully considered every detail to avoid mistakes. During this time, Donna portrayed the perfect devoted wife. She stayed close to her husband, accompanied him everywhere, and made sure no one suspected any issues in their marriage. Friends and neighbors genuinely thought they were a happy couple, and even Ghulam was convinced of it. Their initial attempt to execute the plan did not go well. Damien was meant to ambush Ghulam as he left the hospital and headed to his car in the parking lot. However, the area was crowded with people, prompting Damien to back out due to the fear of too many witnesses. It took them another month to devise a new strategy. This time, they aimed to attack on a deserted road where no one would be present to intervene. The plan was straightforward. Damien would follow their car at a safe distance, and Donna would stop at a designated location, pretending there was a medical emergency. They set the date for Friday, May 13, 2005. On that day, Dr. Ghulam planned to visit a neighboring state to look at a house he wanted to buy as a wedding gift for his nephew, Farouk Munda. Donna offered to go with him, but her 72-year-old mother, Dorothy Smouse, who was visiting at the time, insisted on joining. Donna tried to talk her out of it, but Ghulam didn't see any issue with her coming along and agreed to let his mother-in-law participate. Damien, dressed entirely in black and wearing ski goggles to conceal his identity, waited in his car for a message from Donna indicating that their vehicle had left the house. Once he received the signal, he followed the predetermined route, maintaining a safe distance behind. After stopping to refuel, Donna took over driving to keep control over their timing. While traveling along a deserted highway, she pretended to feel ill and pulled over, claiming she needed to take some medication. At that moment, a black Volkswagen approached from behind. A man in ski goggles jumped out, ran to the passenger side where Ghulam was sitting, pointed a gun at him, and demanded his wallet. Ghulam complied without resistance, handed over his wallet. However, as soon as the attacker received the money, he shot Ghulam in the head and quickly returned to his vehicle, driving away rapidly. Ghulam died instantly from the gunshot. Donna then called emergency services, crying and screaming as she begged them to save her husband. She acted so convincingly like a distraught widow that, at first, no one suspected she could have been involved in the incident. Inconsistencies in the testimonies appeared quickly. Right from the initial interviews, it was evident that something was not right. Donna stated she didn't see the attacker or his vehicle, everything happened too quickly, and she was in shock. In contrast, her mother provided a different account. She claimed she saw both the shooter and the car clearly. According to her, the person who shot her son-in-law was a young black man driving a black Volkswagen. This assertion visibly upset Donna, who argued with her mother, insisting that she must have been mistaken. However, her mother remained firm and began to add more specific details. Donna contended that they had stopped the car because Ghulam requested it, while her mother claimed it was Donna who stopped the car, as illness. Investigators were also puzzled as to why the assailant only targeted one person while leaving 2 possible witnesses unharmed. 2 days after the incident, Dr. Ghulam's widow held a press conference where she answered reporters' questions with tears in her eyes. She made a heartfelt appeal to the public, urging anyone with information about the case to come forward and help with the investigation. Shortly after the press conference, the police received a phone call from a woman who claimed that Donna was actually the mastermind behind the incident and that she had been assisted by her lover, Damien Bradford. The caller also provided details such as the make and license plate number of Damien's car, as well as his home address. This caller considered herself to be Damien's fiancée. She had been closely monitoring the couple and shared all the information she had gathered. On the same day, police arrested Damien and searched his apartment. Although he had managed to get rid of the weapon, for some unknown reason, he kept the victim's wallet and brought it home. Inside the wallet, they found about $3,000 in cash, several bank cards belonging to Dr. Ghulam, and a photo of Donna. Authorities also discovered clothes with small blood stains that matched the doctor's. Damien was arrested and taken into custody. He mistakenly believed that his wealthy lover would help him and somehow secure his release. However, Donna, fearing for her own safety, chose to stay silent, hoping that all the blame would fall on Damien, especially since the evidence against him was overwhelming. When prosecutors told Damien that he might face the death penalty, he decided to cooperate with them in exchange for a shorter sentence. He disclosed the entire plan, provided text messages and documents, including evidence that Donna had purchased the car he was driving. In July 2007, Damien pleaded guilty to the crime and testified in court, explaining all the details of the scheme. Because he cooperated, he was sentenced to 17.5 years in prison. Donna was eventually sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on September 21, 2007, for the murder for hire conviction, with an additional 360 months to run concurrently on the remaining charges. Despite Donna's numerous appeals, the court upheld the original sentence. She is currently serving her sentence at the Tallahassee Federal Correctional Institution in Tallahassee, Florida. After being released on supervised release in 2020, Damien Bradford was arrested again on July 29, 2022, following an altercation with state police at the Franklin Mini Mart in Aliquippa. During his struggle with an officer, Bradford fired a shot at the officer, hitting him in the leg. Damien was convicted of attempted murder and aggravated assault on the officer, sentenced to 36.5 to 73 years in state prison in November 2023. In December of that year, the district court added a consecutive 10-year sentence for violating the terms of his supervised release. As of press time, Damien is serving his sentence at the Albion State Correctional Institution, located in Albion, Pennsylvania. The murder of Dr. Ghulam Munda on May 13, 2005, shattered the illusion of a perfect life in Hermitage, Pennsylvania, exposing a chilling tale of addiction and betrayal. Donna Munda, 23 years younger than her devoted husband, succumbed to a dependency on painkillers and an obsessive affair with Damien Bradford, leading her to orchestrate Ghulam's death for his $12 million estate. Ghulam's kindness and medical legacy endure in the community's memory, marked by tributes in 2025, while his tragic end serves as a stark warning of addiction's power to corrupt and destroy, urging greater vigilance to prevent such devastations. Timothy Wiltsey was born on August 6, 1985. His family called him Timmy. By 1991, when he was 5 years old, he lived with his mother, Michelle Ludzinski, in the small town of South Amboy, New Jersey. On Memorial Day weekend, which also marked the end of the school year, Timothy and Michelle went to a carnival at an amusement park in the nearby town of Sayreville. On May 25, 1991, Michelle's 14-year-old niece, Jennifer Blair Dilcher, and her mother came to visit. However, their plans changed, and they could not go to the carnival together. Michelle and Timothy arrived at the park around 7 p.m. Michelle bought several tickets for the rides, and then they walked over to a soda machine. While she turned away for a few minutes to pay for the drinks, Timothy disappeared. Jennifer was supposed to be picked up by her mother's friend, who was her babysitter. They arrived 15 minutes late and found Michelle frantically looking for her son. As soon as she saw Jennifer and the nanny, Michelle explained that she had been momentarily distracted. Now her son was missing. The group decided to split up and search for him. Jennifer and her nanny quickly found a police officer in the park and asked for assistance. Meanwhile, Michelle spoke to the officer, describing her son Timothy as wearing a tank top, shorts, and sneakers with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on them. She filed a report about Timothy's disappearance, prompting the officer to start searching the park. The celebration was paused, and the area was cordoned off for a thorough investigation. That evening, the search area widened to include nearby forests and beyond. Finding Timothy quickly was proving difficult. Sadly, there were no surveillance cameras in the area at the time. The following day, multiple search teams were sent out. The local authorities provided a helicopter and a team of divers to check 2 nearby ponds. Hundreds of volunteers joined the search and rescue efforts, covering a large area. Many law enforcement officers worked alongside them in the park and its surroundings over the next few days, but they were unable to locate Timothy. During this difficult time, Michelle's family supported her. According to her father and sister, she appeared to be a devastated mother. Michelle never imagined that such a tragedy could happen to her. Just a few weeks earlier, she had bought a graduation dress for her child's kindergarten ceremony. They were getting ready for the celebration and planning a trip to visit Michelle's sister in Florida for the holidays. Everything seemed normal. Despite facing financial challenges, Michelle did not want to rely solely on government assistance. She continued to work and received some support from her family. George Wiltsey, the boy's father, had no relationship with him. Michelle met George after she dropped out of school. She initially lived with her parents on Long Island before choosing to start a family with him. They dated for about 3 years and then moved to New Jersey. While in New Jersey, Michelle became pregnant and gave birth to Timothy in 1985, with George being 18 and Michelle 17 at the time. They decided to expand their family, but eventually moved to George's home state of Iowa. Unfortunately, they struggled to create a stable life together. 6 months after the move, Michelle returned to New Jersey, first living with her sister and her husband. Later, she moved into a rented apartment with Timothy and cut all ties with George. Michelle didn't reveal why she and George broke up, but she prevented him from seeing their son afterward. George didn't provide child support, and Michelle rejected his assistance. She even sent back all the items he mailed for their son. People who knew them suspected that banned substance use might have played a role in their breakup, and George had physically assaulted Michelle at least once. George, however, argued that Michelle longed for New Jersey and her family, which led her to distance herself from him. In the spring of 1991, Michelle, a 23-year-old single mother, was raising her 5-year-old son on her own. She was the only provider for both of them and was determined to create a stable life, which meant she often had to switch jobs. However, her limited education made it difficult to maintain consistent employment. Over time, she worked as a legal assistant, a secretary, and in various retail positions, sometimes juggling 2 jobs at once. Her father helped by sending her money for housing, which was crucial for their survival. Managing everything while caring for a young child was challenging. Michelle frequently needed assistance from family and friends to look after her son while she worked. When no one could help, she would bring him along, which often made her late for work. This tardiness harmed her reputation and led to her being fired from jobs. In January 1990, her support network took a hit when her sister and brother-in-law, who had been a key source of help, moved to Florida. Feeling overwhelmed and without adequate support, Michelle made the difficult decision to send her son to live with her brother in Minnesota for 2 months. This would allow her to save money for his education. Many people who knew Michelle described her as a dedicated mother who devoted all her free time to her son, ensuring he had everything he needed. They often went hiking together and worked on school preparations at home. However, after her son went missing, some critics emerged. They pointed out that her son, Tim, created tension in her romantic relationships. Many of the men she dated were reluctant to take on the responsibility of raising another person's child, which often led to the end of their relationships with her. In her frustration, Michelle started to see her son as a burden. One of her former partners described her as an immature mother who acted more like Timothy's older sister than a parent, saying she often neglected the child's needs. One day, Timothy entered a neighbor's yard and was bitten by the neighbor's dog, requiring 72 stitches on his face. This happened despite the neighbor warning Michelle to supervise her son to keep him off his property. A friend of Timothy's noted that Timothy was very afraid of Michelle's last boyfriend, Fred Bruno. Even though Fred left a negative impression on many, Michelle did not take her son's fears seriously. The friend even speculated that Fred might be involved in Timothy's disappearance. Initially, Timothy's biological father was considered a primary suspect. He had been estranged from Michelle and was prohibited from contacting his son, which gave him a potential motive for kidnapping Tim. Authorities thoroughly searched the father's home but found no evidence of Tim. He passed a polygraph test and had a strong alibi. Fred Bruno was also investigated but was quickly ruled out as a suspect. When the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, became involved in the search for Tim, they began to question Michelle Ludzinski's true identity. Her behavior appeared odd. She did not seem genuinely worried about her son's disappearance. Michelle was experiencing financial issues and difficulties. For many young single mothers, this ongoing stress can sometimes lead to thoughts of abandoning their child, whom they may view as a major source of their problems. Some mothers choose to place their children with relatives, some give up their parental rights, and tragically, some even harm their children. As a result, Michelle quickly became a primary suspect in the case of her son's disappearance or potential murder. Authorities were eager to find out what she had done to him. Just days after Timothy went missing, she took a lie detector test but failed. A week later, she took another test and failed again. The expert who conducted the tests noted that Michelle showed significant emotional fluctuations, avoided eye contact, and seemed more focused on her own situation than on her child's well-being. Several clear signs of deception were observed, and investigators later found out that Michelle had lied to her close friends, claiming she had passed the lie detector test. The situation attracted a lot of public attention. Family members and neighbors also noticed that Michelle didn't express much emotion or seem to grieve for her missing child. During a press conference where she announced her son's disappearance and asked for help, many people felt she seemed too calm, speaking in a flat tone that resembled reading from a script. This observation increased suspicion. Although her relatives insisted she was deeply affected and just kept her emotions in check because of her personality, the inconsistencies in her behavior raised concerns. Michelle's account of her child's disappearance was inconsistent and raised suspicions. In the month after Timothy went missing, she kept adding more details to her story during each interaction with the police. Her narrative changed drastically. What initially seemed like a case of carelessness transformed into a kidnapping involving different attackers, first two men, then a man and a woman. This left law enforcement officials uncertain about the truth. Michelle believed her son was being held captive. She based this belief on a call from an anonymous individual who claimed that Timothy would be returned within a month if she remained calm. This is why she seemed so self-assured. Although this information couldn't be verified, it raised questions about why she would fabricate such a story. Her odd behavior prompted detectives to investigate her more closely. Given the time that had passed since Timothy's disappearance, they suspected he might not be found alive. Investigators checked if Michelle had received any large money transfers related to a potential sale of her son, but found no significant transactions, and her financial situation had not changed. They searched her home and car, initially suspecting that she might have harmed her son, but found no blood evidence. They went further and used luminol to detect any hidden blood stains, but again found nothing. However, Michelle's history of dishonesty led detectives and even her friends to doubt her credibility. One friend agreed to have her card tapped to try to extract a confession, but this attempt failed. Over the next 11 months, no damaging recordings or admissions were made, yet Michelle continued to offer inconsistent accounts of events. 3 extensive interviews were conducted, but aside from providing conflicting information, she did not give any new leads. Michelle struggled to understand why the detectives were so focused on her and remained convinced that her son was alive and would come back. In October 1991, an important discovery was made. A school teacher walking in the industrial area near the Raritan River found a sneaker that had a picture of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on it. It was known that Timothy loved these characters. A passerby, who had seen news reports about Timothy's disappearance, remembered that just before he went missing, Michelle had bought him similar shoes. Believing there might be a connection, the passerby contacted law enforcement for further investigation. When the sneaker was first shown to Michelle, She denied it was the same shoe she had bought for her son and listed several identifying features. However, she later hesitated and suggested that the shoe could possibly belong to Tim. This change in her story raised suspicion. The police continued their investigation and found that Michelle had previously worked at the industrial complex close to where a sneaker were discovered, coinciding with the time when Timothy went missing. Notably, she had not mentioned this to the detectives. Colleagues reported that her behavior changed after Timothy's disappearance. She frequently took walks by the stream bank, her workplace, during lunch breaks without providing any explanation. After the first sneaker was found, concerning rumors began to spread, which led FBI agents to investigate the area more thoroughly. During a search along the stream bank, investigators found a skull and 10 other bones in and around a truck tire that had been dredged from the bottom of Red Root Creek. These were located near pieces of the boy's clothing, a pillowcase, a Ninja Turtles balloon, and a blue and white blanket that were buried in an embankment 6.1 meters from the creek bed where the bones were discovered. Law enforcement agencies received these remains on April 23, 1992. Strikingly, Michelle showed no emotional response when informed about this discovery. Fibers and hair taken from the blanket were analyzed, but they did not match Michelle's hair, Timothy's, or anyone from her family. The child's body was also examined closely, and dental records confirmed that the skull belonged to Tim. However, due to the missing skeletal bones and the complete decomposition of soft tissue, the medical examiner could not determine the cause of the child's death. By this time, Michelle had begun a new chapter in her life, moving to a neighboring state as if nothing had happened. At that point, there was no evidence linking her to the alleged murder, and the investigation went cold. However, more strange events involving her were yet to unfold. In January 1994, Michelle found herself back in the news. She made national headlines by sharing a terrifying story about how 2 federal agents kidnapped her outside her home. They threatened her with a gun, forced her into a car, and drove her to Detroit, where they eventually let her go. She managed to find her way back home on her own. Michelle reached out to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, reporting that 2 men had called her multiple times, threatening her while pretending to be agents. They insisted that she cooperate and confess to Timothy's murder. Despite their pressure, Michelle maintained her innocence, which she claimed resulted in her kidnapping. Her story captured national attention, shocking the public. Opinions were sharply divided. Some people were furious and called for the authorities to stop harassing her, while others supported the agents' unorthodox methods to extract a confession from a woman they suspected of killing her son. When she returned from Detroit, a note appeared on her door that read, "It's not over." It was thought that she had placed this note herself to support her fabricated kidnapping narrative. Michelle admitted to faking her own kidnapping by taking a bus to Detroit but refused to discuss her conflicting accounts of Timmy's disappearance any further. In March 1995, she was sentenced to 6 months of house arrest and 3 years of probation for the FBI hoax. The Sayreville police believed she staged the kidnapping to avoid being implicated in an investigation of her boyfriend, a police officer from neighboring Union County, who had been accused of improperly checking the license plates of cars that Michelle claimed were following her. In May, the police department decided not to take any action against him in relation to the charges. In 1997, while pregnant with her second child, Michelle pleaded guilty to stealing a computer from a former employer to give to her police officer boyfriend as a Christmas present. Upon receiving the computer, he realized it had been stolen and reported it. She was subsequently sentenced to house arrest for 4 months and was also placed on probation for an additional 3 years. Meanwhile, Timothy's case remained unsolved and had reached a dead end, with even FBI agents unable to make progress. The technology available in the 1990s did not permit a detailed analysis of the evidence needed to obtain physical proof against Timothy's biological mother. Shortly after her sentence was handed down in 1998, Michelle moved to Florida, and in 1999, she relocated to Apple Valley, Minnesota, a suburb of Minneapolis, where she married in 2001 and started a new family. Timothy was not forgotten. In the early 2010s, the case file and evidence were still stored as they were, and the district attorney's office did little more than follow up on occasional tips. After a tip around the 20th anniversary of Timothy Wiltsey's disappearance, which had nothing to do with the case, Scott Crocco, an investigator with the office, decided it was time to revisit the investigation and see if there was anything that could help solve the case. He focused on the blanket. Investigators reasoned that the boy would not have carried a large blanket through the carnival on the humid 90 degrees Fahrenheit day he went missing. They concluded that the blanket had been taken from Ladzinski's South Amboy home to cover the boy after he died, even though she denied ever having owned such a blanket. Detectives believe that the blanket should have been recognized by people who had interacted with Michelle before her child's murder and then reconnected with her relatives and friends afterward. Several witnesses, including former co-workers, reported seeing Michelle using the blanket. In the early 2000s, Michelle lived in Minnesota with her new husband and their son. After their marriage ended in 2003, Michelle moved to Florida while pregnant with her third child. In Florida, she gave birth, purchased a home, settled in with her two children, and worked as a paralegal at a law firm. She kept photos of her firstborn son, who had passed away, to honor his memory and ensure her children knew he had existed. The investigation into his death is ongoing. Crocco interviewed Jennifer Blair Dilcher, the niece who met Michelle at the carnival shortly after Michelle said she couldn't find her son. In the years that followed, Jennifer, who had initially supported her aunt, married and had two children of her own, but also became addicted to banned substance. She went to Florida for rehab, leaving the children with Michelle during that time. While Jennifer was in the program, Michelle and Jennifer's mother decided that Jennifer's condition was serious enough that they could not return the children after she completed the program, so they placed them with Jennifer's mother-in-law, whom Jennifer greatly disliked. It took Jennifer some time to regain custody of the children, and she considered Michelle's decision a betrayal. At Crocco's behest, Jennifer began contacting her aunt on Facebook about the case, hoping that Michelle might confess or make some incriminating statement. After being unsuccessful, Crocco showed Jennifer blankets, pillowcases, and a red jacket. She immediately told him that the blanket had been in Michelle's apartment and that Timothy had wrapped himself in it during her babysitting sessions. Two other women who helped care for Timothy also recognized the blanket. This evidence established a crucial connection. It became evident that the blanket couldn't have been mistakenly left near the body, suggesting that Michelle had intentionally brought it to the industrial complex, thinking the body would remain undiscovered there. On August 6, 2014, what would have been Timmy's 29th birthday, following a sealed grand jury indictment, Michelle Ladzinski was arrested in Florida and charged with his son's murder. Prosecutors believed they had sufficient evidence to secure a conviction for first-degree murder. The hearings drew a crowd of concerned individuals, and opinions were mixed. The trial was difficult and stretched from March to May 2016. The only new evidence presented was the testimony of several witnesses stating that the blanket found near the boy belonged to his mother. Jennifer testified at her aunt's trial, claiming she saw the blanket in Michelle's home and believed in Michelle's guilt. However, several witnesses said they had never seen the blanket in Michelle's home, and there were no photographs showing it with her and the boy. Fibers and hairs taken from the blanket were re-examined, providing more detailed analyses than the microscopic tests done in 1991. Unfortunately, these results showed that none of the hairs belonged to Michelle or Tim. Additionally, the prosecution pointed to Michelle's strange behavior. Her inconsistent statements and her calmness when discussing Timothy seemed to suggest her involvement. However, the defense attorney effectively argued that this evidence was insufficient to label the defendant a murderer. The location where the remains were found was only a few hundred meters from the building where Michelle Ladzinski worked at that time. It was an inconspicuous area that almost no one visited. Michelle was aware of this and may have deliberately chosen this place to hide the body. The prosecutor was convinced that there was too much circumstantial evidence, all of which pointed to the boy's mother. However, Michelle's lawyer argued that from May 25, 1991 to April 1992, when the body was discovered, several major storms had occurred. Independent experts confirmed that the Red Root stream, near which the skull and belongings were found, had overflowed its banks. It was located not far from the amusement park where Timothy disappeared, so the water could have carried evidence to that location. This was indirectly supported by the fact that many fragments of the boy's skeleton were never found. The prosecutor's approach had evolved since the investigation in the 1990s. They argued that Timothy had never gone to the amusement park. He had actually been missing long before then. A new theory was presented to the jury. Michelle had gone to the park alone after disposing of her son and had asked relatives to pretend an abduction had occurred. Meanwhile, Michelle's testimony kept changing. The defense attorney provided an explanation for Michelle's unusual behavior. An independent psychiatric evaluation revealed that she has antisocial personality disorder, which may have contributed to her confusing and inconsistent stories. The lawyer noted that the disorder became particularly evident in 1991, right after her son went missing. This was used to explain her strange actions, which were seen as responses to extreme stress and trauma. The evaluation confirmed the diagnosis, with evidence suggesting troubling behaviors. Consequently, the lawyer argued that Michelle's dishonest claims, including her stories about kidnapping, were a result of her illness. At trial, the prosecution argued that Michelle had murdered her son. They claimed that due to giving birth at a very young age, she faced ongoing financial and emotional challenges. Timothy had grown up during a particularly tough time in Michelle's life. Timothy did not have a relationship with his father, George. Michelle kept George from having contact with him and consistently turned down any offers of assistance. With no support system, she struggled to improve her circumstances, and her relationships with men were unsuccessful, which further complicated her situation. The Lodzinski family was divided during the hearings. Michelle's father and sister believed she was a good mother, while her brother and niece, Jennifer, suggested she may have been involved in Timothy's death. Michelle's defense also presented testimony from an Arizona man who claimed that a former inmate from Georgia had confessed to him that he had abused and killed a young boy somewhere near Atlanta. The testimony did not provide any evidence that the man was in the Sayreville area at the time of Timothy Wiltsey's disappearance, and the man himself denied this on the stand. Prosecutors further questioned the Arizona man's credibility by pointing out that he had previously accused another man of assaulting and abusing him. Another witness testified for the defense about a possible third party, a resident of an apartment complex near the festival, who saw several men throw something about 4 feet long, wrapped in white cloth, into the trunk of a car before driving away quickly without turning on the headlights. After hearing testimony from 68 witnesses, the jury began deliberating in May. The next day, a week before the 25th anniversary of Timothy's disappearance, the jury returned a guilty verdict for first-degree murder. Sentencing was scheduled for August 2016 but was postponed as Michelle's attorneys appealed the judge's earlier rulings regarding jury misconduct and insufficient evidence. Shortly thereafter, the defense moved for a judgment of default, requesting the judge to vacate the conviction and acquit her on the grounds that the evidence was insufficient for a reasonable jury to convict. The judge denied this motion, and in January 2017, he sentenced Michelle Lodzinski to 30 years in state prison without the possibility of parole. After the trial, the jury told reporters that their opinions were mixed. Not all of them believed she was guilty. They were particularly influenced by the unusual testimony from Michelle, which implied that she was hiding something. However, they questioned why she would do that if she were innocent. Immediately after, Michelle's defense team approached the case with renewed determination. They aimed to have her acquitted, emphasizing that there was no physical evidence linking her to Timothy's death. Extensive checks and tests were conducted, but there were no traces of the boy's blood or any indication that Michelle had harmed him or concealed his body. After their appeal was denied, the lawyer escalated the case to the Supreme Court, highlighting the uncertainty surrounding Timothy's cause of death. He proposed that Timothy might have simply run away from the park and died from natural causes, insisting that no one had killed him. Additionally, he pointed out that several legal standards required for a murder charge and conviction had not been met. The Chief Justice recused himself from the case, and with the remaining justices unable to reach a consensus, the guilty verdict was upheld. The defense attorney, undeterred, after the 2016 conviction, Michelle's defense team appealed, escalating the case to the New Jersey Supreme Court, where Chief Justice Stuart Rabner recused himself. On December 28, 2021, the court vacated the conviction by a 4-3 decision, citing insufficient evidence to prove murder beyond a reasonable doubt. Michelle Ludzinski was released from Edna Mahan Correctional Facility that day, having served over 7 years. Double jeopardy prevented a retrial. She reunited with her family in Florida, where she had previously relocated. Despite the legal outcome, her brother and others, including George Wiltse, continued to suspect her involvement, though no new evidence has emerged to reopen the case. After her release, Michelle's brother, who had testified against her during the trial, stated that the jury was correct in convicting her of murder. He argued that the lawyer did not rectify a significant wrong, but instead took away justice for little Tim. However, under state law, Michelle cannot be tried again for this case, even if new evidence arises in the future. The boy's biological father, George, still suspects that Michelle was involved in their son's death. He questions whether she committed the act herself or if she knows who did. Many of Michelle's family members also believe she is guilty, citing her strange behavior, inconsistent statements during interrogations, and the FBI's mishandling of the kidnapping. They are puzzled by why Michelle focused her time and energy on these issues instead of seeking the truth about her son's case. Although Timothy Wiltse's murder remains officially unsolved, many believe that his mother evaded responsibility. Emily Beatriz Azevedo Sena was born in Várzea Grande, a city in the Brazil state of Mato Grosso. She lived with her mother and her stepfather, who became a father figure to her when she was 6. He worked as a radiology technician at Santa Helena Hospital in the nearby city of Cuiabá. The family lived a modest yet close-knit life. Emily was known for her kind nature, calm demeanor. Classmates and neighbors often described her as a gentle person who avoided conflict. At 16, Emily found out she was pregnant, a surprising discovery that she ultimately accepted. The father was a young partner of similar age. Instead of pulling away, he supported her throughout the situation. They started living together and he actively participated in getting ready for the baby's arrival. He went with Emily to doctor visits, assisted with planning, took part in conversations about names and baby items. Despite their youth, her partner demonstrated a strong sense of responsibility, dedication. Although their relationship encountered challenges because of their age, it was characterized as stable, supportive. For Emily, becoming pregnant was a major milestone in her life. She eagerly talked about her future daughter and shared her excitement with family, friends. Her mother and stepfather were very supportive, helping her choose furniture, buy clothes, prepare the nursery. Their home was filled with joy and anticipation. They celebrated the gender reveal twice, once with her partner's relatives and again with Emily's family. Friends remembered how glowing she looked when discussing her journey to motherhood. In another part of Mato Grosso, Natalie Helen Martins Pereira, a 25-year-old married to Christian Albino Cibalho de Arruda, 28, was raising their 3 children, a girl and 2 boys. Natalie worked in public safety, officially employed by the fire department while also taking nursing classes. To others, she seemed organized, responsible. However, beneath this surface, her life was more complicated. Several years ago, Natalie had a medical procedure that tied her fallopian tubes, which prevented her from becoming pregnant naturally. Despite this, she began claiming that she was expecting another child. To support her claims, Natalie created fake medical documents, including ultrasound images, and told others that she was having a baby girl. Christian believed her and shared the news on social media, posted the ultrasound images, even organized a gender reveal party. To make her story seem more convincing, Natalie often posted pictures of herself with what looked like a growing belly or loose clothing and explained her physical appearance as a sign of her impending delivery. In reality, this was all part of a carefully orchestrated and emotionally manipulative lie, a fake pregnancy that relied on fabricated evidence. Natalie not only staged a fake situation but also created an online identity. She joined various online groups for expecting mothers, where she pretended to be a helpful member who often offered items like baby clothes, diapers, and accessories to other moms-to-be. However, there was a catch. The items could only be picked up in person at her house, and the person collecting them had to come alone. This was a deliberate strategy where her online persona was used to make contacts and choose potential targets. No one in Natalie's close circle, neither Christian nor her family, realized that her cheerful demeanor was a meticulously crafted facade. She was intent on making her story a reality, regardless of the consequences. A few weeks before her disappearance, Emily started participating more often in online groups for expecting mothers. She shared her pregnancy thoughts, sought advice, and welcomed support. In one of these forums, she was approached by a user. Her messages were friendly. She offered to donate items for Emily's future daughter, such as clothes, baby blankets, and diapers. This seemed generous, and Emily was genuinely interested. Their conversation soon turned more personal. The user came across as warm and caring, emphasizing her desire to help. When Emily suggested bringing someone with her, like her partner or sister, Natalie became uneasy. She mentioned that her street had many nosy neighbors, and she wanted to avoid attracting any attention. Although her responses were unclear, they didn't raise any major red flags. Emily talked it over with her family and initially decided against going by herself. However, she changed her mind after Natalie offered to send a driver to pick her up, saying the car would be from a ride-sharing service like Uber. On March 12, 2024, around noon, a car came to pick up Emily. However, the driver, as later discovered by investigators, was not affiliated with any ride-sharing service. It was believed that he was either a relative or a friend of Natalie. The car was an ordinary civilian vehicle. Unaware of any potential danger, Emily got in after telling her mother that she would be back soon. She thought the outing would be just a quick trip to collect some donated items before returning home. After more than an hour without any updates from Emily, her mother, Anna Paula Meridian, started to feel anxious. Soon, messages began to come from Emily's phone. However, instead of soothing her worries, the texts only increased her anxiety. Emily claimed she was fine, enjoying a pastry, and would be back soon. Yet, something felt wrong. The language used was strange, overly formal, and didn't match Emily's usual way of writing. Anna quickly realized that someone else must have sent the messages. She attempted to call Emily, but there was no response, and her voice messages went unheard. As her concern grew, the family reached out to friends and acquaintances in hopes of finding Emily. Emily's stepfather was working at the hospital that day. He sensed something was wrong. He knew Emily had intended to pick up some items, and her failure to answer calls made him even more anxious. That evening, the family quickly decided to file a missing person report. At that time, no one knew where Emily was, who the driver was, or where she was headed. The only clue the family had was an online conversation with the woman, who mentioned living in the Jardim Florianopolis neighborhood in Cuiabá. This clue marked the beginning of a search by family members and friends. Worried and desperate, they knocked on doors in the neighborhood, checked the streets, and attempted to call the number mentioned in the messages, but no one answered. Communication had completely stopped. Emily's phone was still on, but she wasn't answering. Then, Natalie suddenly changed her online behavior. She stopped replying to chat group messages and withdrew her support for others. Later, it was revealed that shortly after Emily left home, Natalie deleted all her messages and her account. This disappearance from the online world only confirmed the family's deepest fears. This was not a chance occurrence. By the evening of March 12th, the search for Emily was in full swing. Her family had reached out to the local police, shared her photos on social media, and appealed to the public for assistance. The initial hours after her disappearance were filled with urgency and anxiety, but no one anticipated how drastically the situation would develop. The following morning, March 13, 2024, a woman arrived at the emergency room of Santa Helena Hospital in Cuiabá with a newborn. She was in a wheelchair and told the hospital staff that she had given birth at home the day before. She described the labor as quick and straightforward, so she hadn't felt the need for medical help at that time. Now, she said, she was just there for a post-delivery checkup. The woman introduced herself as Natalie. That morning, The hospital staff member on duty was Emily's stepfather, a radiology technician. Although he did not know Natalie personally, he immediately sensed that something was wrong when he saw her. The previous evening, Emily had gone missing, and one of the primary theories suggested it was linked to a conversation she had with an online stranger who was offering baby items. Emily had previously mentioned to both her mother and her stepfather that she met someone online. She even shared a photo of her from the messaging app. Emily's stepfather immediately recognized the woman in the photo as the same person Emily had been talking to before she disappeared. Natalie was holding a newborn baby that the doctors believed had just been born. However, something seemed unusual. Her behavior and physical state did not align with what one would expect from someone who had recently given birth. There were no visible signs of pain, post-labor symptoms, bleeding, or trauma. Medical staff also found that she was not producing milk when she tried to breastfeed. Even the way she stood and moved raised concerns. Even though she arrived in a wheelchair, she moved around confidently and chose to sit in a chair rather than needing to. A preliminary medical evaluation raised concerns. There were no signs that she had recently given birth. Her cervix was not dilated, and her uterus was of normal size, showing no changes or discharges that usually occur after delivery. This became crucial evidence that proved her story was false. The medical staff quickly informed hospital administrators and contacted local authorities about the situation. Emily's stepfather told investigators that Emily had gone missing the day before after planning to meet a woman. When he recognized the woman in front of him matched Emily's description and photo, his concerns grew. When officers arrived at the hospital, Natalie claimed that the newborn girl was her daughter, whom she had given birth to at home. She could not provide any documentation to support her claim, saying the birth was unexpected and there was no time to go to a medical facility. She answered questions calmly and showed no signs of distress. Investigators started looking into the origin of the newborn. They ordered emergency blood tests and DNA analysis. Medical professionals confirmed that the baby had been born within the last 24 hours, which matched the timeline of Emily's disappearance. This led to a troubling question: could this child be Emily's daughter? Investigators examined Natalie's phone and found deleted conversations, including exchanges with Emily. These messages showed that Emily had agreed to meet Natalie to receive baby items. This evidence indicated a clear pattern of deception. Natalie had created a false identity, gained trust, and arranged a meeting under false pretenses. At this point, the idea that Natalie had simply gone to the hospital for a checkup was no longer believable. Law enforcement began to suspect that Natalie may have brought a baby that she did not give birth to, but rather one that was taken from someone else. Their suspicions were confirmed when they analyzed ultrasound images that Natalie had shared on social media. Investigators discovered that these images did not belong to her. They were taken from another woman's profile, a woman living in a different state, who had no known connection to Natalie. As these discrepancies emerged, the police shifted their focus to finding Emily. The infant Natalie had brought to the hospital was placed in temporary protective custody, under the care of social services, until her biological identity could be verified. Shortly after, Natalie was taken to the police station for formal questioning. At first, she remained silent. When directly asked about the child's origin, she gave vague answers, claiming that everything had been explained and that nothing wrong had occurred. Although she appeared calm and showed no signs of panic, her reluctance to provide a clear explanation led investigators to suspect that she was stalling. Only after investigators showed her the medical exam results, which disproved her claim of giving birth, along with the recovered text messages linking her to Emily, did Natalie change her story. She then shared her initial account of events. She claimed to have met Emily in online parenting groups and said that Emily was struggling in her relationship. Emily had thought about not keeping the baby. Natalie asserted that she offered to take care of the child and that Emily had agreed. However, law enforcement had doubts about this explanation. Emily's family strongly denied any claims that she intended to give up her daughter. They insisted that Emily had been excited about her baby's arrival and never showed any doubts about keeping her. The whole family actively prepared for the new baby by buying clothes, setting up a nursery, and celebrating together. Emily's mother and stepfather emphasized that she viewed her future daughter as the most important part of her life, and the thought of giving the baby away was entirely unthinkable for her. This information was part of the official case file, and Natalie's statements were now being examined for inconsistencies. When faced with increasing evidence, Natalie eventually changed her story. In a second interview with investigators, she confessed that she had tricked Emily into coming to a house by pretending to offer baby items. Emily arrived alone, as they had agreed in their online communication. Emily then began to feel pain and sat down, complaining of cramps. At that moment, Natalie approached her from behind and forcefully restrained her. After Emily lost consciousness, Natalie bound her wrists and ankles with materials she had available. She then tried to deliver the baby by making an incision in Emily's abdomen with a sharp kitchen tool. Emily received no medical assistance and ultimately died due to severe blood loss. Natalie did not express any regret in her statement. She claimed that she wanted to take care of the baby and did not mean to cause any harm. However, the way she acted, using restraints and preparing certain materials, suggested that her actions were thought out beforehand. As Natalie continued to speak, her versions of events became more inconsistent with the facts. Investigators ultimately determined that the incident was pre-planned. After questioning Natalie, law enforcement started investigating all places associated with her. One property in the Jardim Florianopolis area received special attention. This private residence, owned by Natalie's brother, was said to be where she met Emily. During the property inspection, police noticed an area behind the house where the ground looked recently disturbed. The soil was uneven. They quickly cordoned off the area and called in forensic specialists. As the specialists carefully removed the top layer of soil, they discovered that a body had been buried. Emily's body was found in a shallow grave, covered loosely with dirt and debris. The way the body was positioned indicated it had been disposed of hurriedly. Her wrists and ankles showed signs of restraints, including ropes and bits of plastic cable. Investigators later determined that the bindings were made from old internet wiring. The grave itself was poorly dug, without the use of tools, and was barely big enough to hold the body. Emily's body displayed clear signs of trauma on her body. Her face had visible injuries, including bruises, swelling, and scratches. Forensic experts noted damage to her cheekbones and nose. There were also marks on her neck that suggested she had been choked, as well as bruises on her wrists indicating she had been forcefully held down. The autopsy revealed that these injuries occurred while she was alive, implying the use of significant force. It was determined that her death resulted from severe blood loss due to a deep wound in her abdomen. The precise T-shaped incision in her lower abdomen indicated that it was not an accident. Forensic experts indicated that the shape and depth of the cut suggested the perpetrator had a basic understanding of internal anatomy and made an effort to avoid injuring the baby. This degree of knowledge is rare for someone without medical training, although it could be obtained by watching detailed instructional videos. This was further confirmed by analyzing Natalie's internet search history. A key finding was that the burial site had been prepped in advance. Initially, Natalie claimed she dug the grave after the incident, but she later changed her story, admitting it was prepared the day before the meeting. A forensic team carefully examined the scene. Using chemical tests, they discovered important traces of biological material both inside the house and throughout the property. Blood stains were present in multiple rooms. Although some parts of the floor had been cleaned, residues were still left in the tile grout and seams. These findings were meticulously recorded and included in the criminal case. Given the amount of evidence, authorities officially reclassified the case as a premeditated crime with aggravating factors. Immediately after her arrest, Natalie stated that she acted alone and that her husband, relatives, anyone else were unaware of her plans. At that time, the house was occupied by her brother and his wife. Natalie stated that her brother and his wife were not home when the crime happened, but investigators could not confirm this. Their exact whereabouts during that time remained uncertain. A significant question was whether they could genuinely be unaware of a freshly dug pit on the property or that someone had come in to help clean the house. However, it was later established that Natalie had been to the house several times leading up to the incident, under the pretense of helping with chores or spending the weekend. This made her visit seem normal and unremarkable to those living there. Forensic experts noted that it would be very challenging for a single person to dig a pit, commit an act of violence, perform a makeshift procedure, move a body, clean the crime scene, hide evidence, and leave the area without drawing attention, all within a short period. This is especially true given the logistical difficulties involved. The body was wrapped in fabric and required various materials, while the cleaning process included removing items, white blood, and washing clothing. Each of these tasks demanded time, strength, and coordination. Did Natalie truly act alone? At the time of the investigation, there were increasing suspicions, but no solid evidence was found linking anyone else to the case. No family member had been officially identified as an accomplice. Cayo Police Chief Fernando Alvarez Albuquerque said authorities are continuing to investigate whether Natalie's husband, brother, and the driver had anything to do with the death and burial. After the body was officially identified and all forensic procedures were completed, Emily's family received permission for a burial. Because of the condition of the remains, the service was conducted quickly. The ceremony was brief and did not include a traditional farewell. It was held privately, attended only by immediate family members, Emily's mother, stepfather, the young father of the baby, and a few other relatives. The family was devastated by the loss. They were deeply affected emotionally and unable to speak publicly about their grief. Emily's mother, as reported by those close to her, was in a fragile emotional state and had withdrawn from social interactions, avoiding even her neighbors. Emily's partner, who never expected to become a father under such tragic circumstances. According to the family, he has remained dedicated. He frequently visits the baby. Despite his young age, he has shown a desire to be actively involved in raising his daughter. The newborn, who was rescued after the incident, has been placed temporarily in the care of her grandmother, Emily's mother, a decision made by child welfare authorities and the district attorney's office. Emily's stepfather is also considered one of the responsible guardians. During the first few weeks, medical professionals monitored the baby's condition closely. Fortunately, she stayed in stable health. After receiving medical clearance, the baby was taken home to the same place where her mother had lived. The reason for Natalie's actions remained a key topic of conversation. Even though she was already a mother of 3, she pretended to be pregnant for almost 9 months, creating an illusion of expecting another child. She went to great lengths to forge medical records and create a believable story online, portraying herself as an expectant parent on social media. However, her goal was not just to have another baby. She specifically sought out expecting mothers who were likely to have daughters. Her method of selecting targets, arranging the setting, and researching how to remove and take baby indicated that her actions were carefully planned. Natalie is still in custody, waiting for her trial. The charges against her are still active, and investigators believe the evidence supporting these charges is strong. Emily's case has gained significant attention and raised serious concerns, influencing how online interactions are perceived, particularly among vulnerable groups. It was a warm summer morning in Melbourne, Australia, on Sunday, February 13, 2005. While most people were making plans for Valentine's Day, the city's attention was focused on something far more serious: a missing woman. Her face had become familiar across news broadcasts. Her name was Maria Korp, and she had been gone for 4 days. That morning, a park caretaker made his way to work at King's Domain along Dallas Brooks Drive. He normally didn't work on Sundays, but a routine inspection of the water tanks had brought him in. After wrapping up his checks, he stopped by a nearby cafe for coffee. That was when he noticed something odd: a red Mazda parked nearby. The color and make matched the car described in the media all week. Curious and increasingly uneasy, he walked over to the vehicle. The front seats were cluttered, with papers strewn everywhere and a stale bread roll left behind. The doors were locked. Nothing seemed forcibly entered, but the scene felt wrong, too quiet, too abandoned. He made the call to the police. When officers arrived, they verified what the caretaker suspected: the car was registered to Maria Korp, the woman who had vanished without a trace days earlier. Just after 1 p.m., forensic technicians began their search. From the outside, it looked like any other parked car until they opened the trunk. Inside, they found a woman, pale, injured, and completely still. It was Maria. There was no movement or signs of life. And then, suddenly, she breathed. Against all odds, Maria was still alive, but barely. She had endured what no one should, days trapped inside the scorching trunk of a car without food or water, suffering serious head injuries and with no way to call for help. By then, the heat of the Australian summer had turned the vehicle into an oven. Every second she survived in that space defied explanation. Maria was immediately taken to the hospital. Doctors determined she had suffered a traumatic brain injury, dehydration, and a dangerous lack of oxygen to her brain. She was placed in an induced coma and hooked up to life support. Her condition was critical. What led Maria Corp to that? Who wanted her gone? And could she survive long enough to tell the world what really happened? Maria's story began far from the busy streets of Melbourne, in a small, rugged village on the Portuguese island of Madeira. Born on January 14, 1955, she was one of 12 children in a devout Catholic family that lived high in the hills, surrounded by farmland and faith. Life was hard. The home had no plumbing, the toilet was outside, and the nearest hospital was hours away, likely unreachable without a car. Despite these challenges, the family was self-sufficient. They owned land, ran a productive farm, raised their children with discipline and devotion. Maria, like her siblings, worked in the fields and followed the rhythm of village life. She was gentle, quiet, never dreamed of much beyond what she knew: marriage, motherhood, and religion. Her heart had already chosen the boy next door. They were young and in love, planning a life together. Her family approved, his did not. Then tragedy struck. He was sent away for military service and never returned. He died before turning 20. The grief changed Maria. She often said she would never love anyone as deeply again. But her parents had other plans. They arranged a marriage for her with a man. At 19, Maria married a man she barely knew. They soon left Madeira in search of a better life. In 1975, they immigrated to Australia, settling in the suburbs of Melbourne. They both found work in a local factory. Maria adapted quickly. She learned English, adjusted to the culture, and found her footing in this unfamiliar land. Her husband, on the other hand, never settled. He disliked their new life and longed to return home, but Maria refused. Australia was their future. In 1978, they welcomed their daughter, Laura de Gois. They bought a modest home and lived simply. But in 1987, disaster struck again. Her husband died unexpectedly of a heart attack. He wasn't even 40. Maria, who was only 32, became a widow and a single mother overnight. With no time to mourn, she went back to work to provide for her daughter. She kept going, step by step, day after day. Somehow, she endured. Eventually, Maria found a second chance at love while working in a tire factory. There, she met Joe Corp, an Australian-born man who was 3 years younger and full of charm. He brought laughter back into her life. However, there was a significant issue: Joe was already married with children. Despite this, he was determined to win Maria over. Although she held strong religious beliefs and principles, her loneliness and hope gradually weakened her ability to resist him. Joe promised that he would leave his wife. Eventually, he did. His decision surprised his family. In front of his children, Joe told his wife that he was leaving her for another woman. While she had suspected infidelity, she never anticipated the public humiliation that followed. By 1991, Joe's marriage had officially ended, and within a few months, he married Maria. In 1994, they had a son named Damien. They lived with Maria's daughter, Laura, in a peaceful suburb of Melbourne. To the people around them, they appeared to be a happy couple. Maria's family believed she had found a sense of peace in her new relationship. They often remarked that Maria loved Joe just as much as she had loved her previous husband. They frequently traveled to Portugal, bringing gifts for Maria's relatives, such as household appliances and electronics. anything they needed, thanks to Joe's support. Some of Maria's siblings thought he was showing off, while others appreciated his generosity. In their eyes, Joe had become the favored son-in-law. Beneath the surface of their quiet home life, things were not as they appeared. Joe had a complicated past. Before Maria, he had relationships with other women. While married, he was unfaithful and even boasted to his brother about his affairs. His ex-wife later shared that he was very controlling, discouraging her from working and telling her what to wear, all while pretending to care. Joe always wanted everything to go his way. Joe was born in 1958, was one of 5 siblings in a typical Australian family. He performed well in school, enjoyed sports, but when he enlisted in the military in 1976, he struggled to adapt and left after less than a year. The tough conditions led him to skip duties to watch cricket matches or spend time with his girlfriend. In 1977, he married, and he had 2 children. Joe worked at a tire factory and eventually became a manager. On the surface, he seemed like a dedicated family man, but he had his secrets. When Maria entered his life, it wasn't just another fling, he decided to be with her for good. Together, they built a new life. Maria continued to work, take care of her children, support her family, and serve her church, while Joe became her partner and a source of strength. However, their relationship had hidden problems. At first, the issues were minor and easy to overlook, but over time, they expanded into something much more serious, leading to a shocking incident. After years of saving, they started building their dream home, a spacious 5-bedroom house featuring a home cinema, a beautiful garden, a large walk-in wardrobe, and a garage for 3 cars. It was more than Maria had ever hoped for, all made possible through years of discipline and careful budgeting. When the house was finally completed, Maria felt a deep sense of pride. To the outside world, her life seemed perfect, a loving husband, 2 children, and a big home. Beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect marriage, the once passionate relationship between Joe and Maria had started to fade. Joe developed new interests that Maria struggled to comprehend, particularly in their intimate life. As a result, she became more emotionally distant. Seeking solace, she found refuge in church and eventually stopped sharing a bed with him altogether. They began sleeping in separate rooms, growing further apart. While Maria sought comfort in her faith, Joe escaped into a fantasy world. He constructed a secret online identity as a construction business owner who was separated from his wife and looking for someone to pamper. His profile presented an enticing image, attracting responses from various women. Initially, their conversations were innocent, but things quickly changed. Joe began meeting women in person and having short-term relationships while lying about many parts of his life. As he spent more time online, he spent less time at home, which Maria noticed. In September 2003, she shared her concerns with her daughter, Laura, who was now an adult, expressing her suspicion that Joe was being unfaithful. Maria started to observe him more closely, and her fears were confirmed when she found intimate messages and receipts from motels. The argument that ensued was intense. Joe denied any wrongdoing and turned the blame onto Maria. He claimed she was emotionally unavailable, always praying, and frequently on the phone with her sisters. This infuriated Maria. She briefly thought about divorce but hesitated due to her religious beliefs. Instead, she decided to fight for their marriage. Determined to win Joe back, Maria made significant changes in her life. She started a diet, refreshed her wardrobe, and even agreed to join him at swinger clubs, actions that were completely out of character for her. She hoped this would rekindle their bond. However, nothing improved. Joe continued his affairs, often stayed out late, and the lies persisted. By early 2005, Maria had reached her breaking point. She threatened to leave, changed the locks, and kicked Joe out. This time, Joe took her seriously. He promised to change, said he would end his affairs, and wanted to start anew. For a brief moment, it seemed like they could reconcile. Maria even told her friends that things were looking up. But then came Wednesday, February 9, 2005. The day started like any other. Maria and Joe woke up early to get ready for work, both of them working at different factories. Around 6:30 a.m., Maria left the house, followed shortly by Joe. Their daughter Laura was still living with them but had a later start time for her job and was still asleep when they left. Everything appeared normal until midday. The school called to inform that their son, Damien, had not been picked up. It was Maria's responsibility to pick him up every day, but no one could reach her. Confused, Joe went to collect Damien himself. He wondered if he had misunderstood or if Maria had asked him for help and he'd forgotten. However, when he returned home, Maria was still missing. As night fell, she had yet to return. Calls to her phone went unanswered, and none of her friends had seen or heard from her. The situation became even more alarming when they discovered that Maria had not shown up for work and had not called in sick. There were no messages or explanations. Maria was not the kind of person to just disappear. That evening, Joe reported Maria missing. The authorities responded immediately. By the next morning, her disappearance was all over the news. Her photo and a description of her missing red Mazda were broadcast on TV and printed in newspapers. The community anxiously hoped for updates. However, what no one realized was that a dark and troubling truth was already visible. Time was quickly running out. The breakthrough in the case occurred just 4 days after Maria disappeared. A city worker found her Mazda parked near King's Domain in Melbourne. It appeared to be an ordinary car until investigators checked the boot. Inside, they discovered Maria crumpled and motionless. She was alive but in critical condition. Doctors identified a severe head injury, but the real concern was the trauma to her neck, indicating someone had attempted to strangle her, cutting off her oxygen for long enough to cause permanent harm. Believing she was dead, the attacker had stuffed her into the boot of her own car. She endured 4 days in that sealed space without water, food, or airflow during the peak of the Australian summer. She was quickly taken to the hospital, put into an induced coma, and connected to machines. Doctors estimated she had only a 25% chance of survival due to severe oxygen deprivation, which had caused significant brain damage that might be irreversible. While the medical team worked hard to save her life, detectives were looking into a different issue: who had tried to kill Maria. They didn't need to look far for a suspect. Before she went missing, Maria had prepared for a potential crisis. She had given a close friend a bag containing printed emails, hotel receipts, and proof of her husband's cheating. "If anything happens to her," she said, "please give this to the police." The warnings didn't come without reason. Maria had been regularly visiting a psychic, and one of them warned her that she was in danger. The warning was clear: her husband might be involved. Maria took this seriously, and she wasn't alone in her concerns. Joe's brother, Gus, also had doubts early on in the search. Gus feared something terrible might have already happened to his sister-in-law. Additionally, Maria's daughter, Laura, recalled something unsettling. On the night Maria was attacked, February 9th, Laura suddenly woke up in the middle of the night and thought she heard her mother scream. When she went downstairs, she found Joe there, calm and smiling. He told her that Maria had just had a bad dream. Uncertain, Laura returned to bed. It was only later that she would start to question whether that scream was the moment her mother's life was in jeopardy. Joe had a solid alibi. He was at work all day, as confirmed by his co-workers. He picked up his son from school and showed real concern when Maria didn't return home. His timeline seemed perfect, but the police had doubts. While they believed Joe may not have directly harmed Maria, they thought he could have been involved in planning it. Soon, investigators uncovered another person of interest, a woman named Tanya Herman. Tanya Herman's story began in 1966. She was born into a traditional working-class Catholic family as one of 4 children. Her childhood was normal. She enjoyed sports, was friendly, often dreamed of love and weddings. At 21, she married in 1987, but her husband was abusive, leading to a difficult divorce. Her next relationship ended in betrayal, but it also brought her a daughter, whom she raised by herself. To support her family, Tanya held various office jobs, worked early shifts, and eventually moved to Melbourne for a fresh start. During this time, she worked as a waitress at a club, where she met Mr. Herman, a sailor. They got married and had a daughter, but unfortunately, that marriage also did not last. By 2002, Tanya was single, struggling to raise her 2 children. To earn some money, she began babysitting kids in her neighborhood. However, her babysitting job ended in scandal when several parents accused her of locking children in a room, and one child even broke their leg. These allegations forced her out of work. Her relationship with her teenage daughter worsened. At just 13 years old, her daughter chose to live with her father. As a result, Tanya became isolated and both financially and emotionally exhausted. She began spending time in online chat rooms. In late 2003, she met a man named Joe, who claimed to be a separated business owner looking for a fresh start and said he had 2 kids. However, the truth was that Joe still married and living with his wife, Maria. Their first meeting in person was in February 2004, and the connection between them was immediate. Tanya was enchanted. Joe seemed to say all the right things and consistently made time for her. He told her he was in the final stages of his divorce. She believed him. By late 2004, they had even rented a house together, just minutes from the home he shared with Maria and his children, of which Tanya was completely unaware. Joe went further by decorating their love nest with furniture similar to that of his marital home. He also enrolled Tanya's daughter in the same school as his own son, a disturbing detail that would only be revealed much later. Joe never moved in with Tanya full-time, despite various excuses. He claimed he was busy with paperwork, finalizing the custody agreement, or waiting for the right moment. However, Tanya began to notice inconsistencies in his stories, and his visits became less frequent. His fabrications, which he had mastered, started to fall apart. When Joe finally admitted that he was still married and that his life was far from what he had described, Tanya was furious. However, her anger quickly faded as her deep love for him took over. She decided to forgive him, but that forgiveness gradually transformed into obsession. Tanya started to follow Maria, observing her at the school gates and memorizing her daily routines. By the end of 2004, Joe was secretly planning to start a new life with his mistress while still living with his wife. His family knew about Tanya, and surprisingly, some even approved of the relationship. They had never liked Maria, likely because their relationship began with cheating. To them, Tanya represented a fresh start. In December of that year, Joe confided in a friend that he was in a new relationship and that his marriage was over. However, Maria remained unaware of this. She still thought they were trying to resolve their issues. What Joe didn't mention was that divorcing Maria meant he would have to divide their assets, including their home and the life they had worked so hard to build together. When police questioned Joe about Maria's disappearance, he confessed to having an affair, but his alibi was strong. In contrast, Tanya did not have an alibi. Detectives began focusing on her when they noticed that she had taken her daughter to school unusually late on the morning Maria disappeared. They brought Tanya in for questioning and searched her home. In the back of her wardrobe, they discovered a pair of sports shoes with red stains that were later confirmed to be blood matching Maria Corp's DNA. Further DNA evidence was found in the Corp family's garage, indicating that the attack likely occurred there. The investigators suspect that, as Maria approached her car, Tanya ambushed her, possibly with Joe's assistance. Once Maria was knocked unconscious, they put her in the trunk of her own car. Tanya then drove away, while Joe went to work, acting as if nothing unusual had occurred. Meanwhile, Tanya's explanation did not add up. She stated that her daughter had simply overslept, which caused her to be late. However, during questioning, detectives observed her nervousness and her frequent mention of Joe. Her tone was affectionate, almost infatuated, revealing that she was willing to do anything for him. Police suspected that both Joe and Tanya were involved in the crime, as they had motives, opportunities. The evidence against them. However, Joe denied any wrongdoing, claiming he was attempting to end the affair. Lacking direct evidence of his guilt, detectives decided to try a different approach. They contacted Tanya's brother and asked him to wear a recording device. This strategy proved successful. During a recorded conversation, Tanya confessed that Joe had no plans to leave his wife because he didn't want to risk losing his wealth. She revealed that Joe believed Maria was the only obstacle to their happiness. Joe thought he couldn't be the one to make Maria disappear without arousing suspicion. However, Tanya was willing to do it, convinced that no one would look for Maria and that their love justified the actions they were considering. Tanya and Joe were arrested on February 16, 2005. Tanya confessed right away, but Joe did not. He accused Tanya of being jealous and insisted that she acted alone. Tanya pleaded guilty to causing serious injury and, without going to trial, she was sentenced to 12 years in prison, with a non-parole period of 9 years. Meanwhile, Maria remained in a coma and did not regain consciousness for several months. Joe was released on bail, and on June 9, he submitted a formal request to visit his wife in the hospital. His request was approved, but unfortunately, her health was not getting better. On July 26, the doctors concluded that keeping her on life support was no longer viable and advised discontinuing it. This decision sparked significant controversy, led to protests outside the hospital. Maria's family was heartbroken, publicly disagreed with the doctor's recommendation, but the medical advice remained unchanged. On August 5, 2005, nearly 6 months after the attack, Maria Korp passed away. Her funeral took place on August 12. On that same day, Joe made 2 phone calls, one to his ex-wife and another to a journalist, where he expressed his intention to take his own life. When emergency services arrived at his home, they found Joe in the garage, standing on a stool with a noose around his neck. Upon seeing the responders, he jumped. Unfortunately, he died at the scene. Beside him were photos of Maria, sports memorabilia, and a handwritten note in which he asserted his innocence. We will never fully know if that note was the final lie or the truth. If Joe had gone to trial, it might have been difficult to prove his guilt, but justice never had the opportunity to take its course. In 2013, several years later, Tanya, who was still in prison, asked to marry another female inmate, but her request was denied. On February 14, 2014, she was paroled after serving a little over 8 years in Dame Phyllis Frost Maximum Security Prison, and her new partner was there to greet her at the prison gates. The death of Maria Korp shocked the entire nation of Australia. Maria was a woman who dedicated her life to her family, love, and faith, yet she was betrayed by the person she trusted the most. Her death was not merely a crime, it was a tragic outcome of obsession, selfishness, and deceit. One of her attackers went to prison, while the other avoided justice by committing to end his life. However, the person who truly paid the highest price was Maria. Her voice was silenced, her future taken away, and her story remains a painful reminder of one of Australia's darkest true crime cases. A question that remains forever unanswered: is Joe Korp guilty?